Chamber of the Boston City Council. My name is Mark Siomo. I'm the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and the Allston Brighton District City Councilor. Today is Thursday, August 2nd. We are here regarding docket 0721, order for a hearing regarding payment in lieu of taxes agreements with the City of Boston. I am joined by several of my colleagues, the two sponsors in order of their arrival, Councilor Anissa Sabi George to my left and Councilor Lydia Edwards to my right, the sponsors of today's hearing order, as well as Councilor Ed Flynn to my left at this time. I'd like to remind folks that this is a public hearing. It's being broadcast live on Comcast Channel 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964, as well as streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. I'd ask folks in the chamber to silence any electronic devices. At the conclusion of the presentation from our panels, questions from my colleagues, we will take public testimony. I would ask folks who wish to testify publicly to sign in, provide your residence, as well as any affiliation, and please mark the box if you do wish to testify after the presentations. I'd like to also explain some of the rules that we have. We ask that there be no signs of approval or disapproval at any point. This is a hearing to provide as much information for the people in the chamber, my colleagues, as well as the public at large viewing and who may view it in the future. I'd also like to welcome members of the Mayor's administration, as well as Sam Tyler, President of the Boston Municipal Research Council. And again, before I turn it over to my colleagues in the panel, I have some of my colleagues that cannot attend today. I'm going to read their statements into the record. Dear Councilor Siomo, I'm writing to apologize for not being able to attend today's Ways and Means hearing on dockets 0721 regarding payment in lieu of taxes agreements with the City of Boston due to a scheduling conflict. I want to state for the record, I believe it is important to engage in this discussion and set a direction for future compliance. I am looking forward to reviewing the tape, any further discussions that result from this hearing. Signed, Councilor Tim McCarthy from District 5. From Councilor Zakem, due to a prior commitment, I am unable to attend today's hearing on docket 0721 regarding payment in lieu of taxes agreement with the City of Boston. With many of our city's large nonprofit institutions located in District 8, I have often raised concerns about pilot payments and the level of participation among our city's medical, education, and cultural institutions. While some of our institutions have proven to be great neighbors to their surrounding communities and the city they call home, others have not. Just this week, we learned that for this fiscal year, the city only received about 3/4 of the amount requested, with nearly half of cultural and educational institutions giving less than 50% of what was asked of them. We must ensure that all of our institutions pay their fair share towards city services. I thank you for holding this important hearing. I look forward to reviewing the video and any written testimony submitted today and working together to continue increasing the success of the pilot program. Signed, Councilor Josh Zakem, District 8. Dear Chairman Siomo, I'm writing to inform you that unfortunately I will be absent from today's hearing on docket 0721 regarding pilot agreements, as I am feeling under the weather. This is an important issue to be discussed, and I support the city doing more to ensure that colleges, universities, and hospitals and certain nonprofits in Boston pay their fair share. I am grateful to the sponsors for calling this hearing and look forward to reviewing the testimony. Kindly read this letter into the record. Sincerely, Councilor Matt O'Malley from District 6. And we have received numerous written testimony from several institutions throughout the city of Boston, including Boston University, Northeastern, Harvard, New England Aquarium, Massport, and many others, which will be distributed to my colleagues and to anyone who wishes to review that written testimony. I would like to kick this off by first saying that, having this discussion is an important thing to continue. We've had great relationships with many of our institutions who contribute to this voluntary program. We need to reevaluate it occasionally, and I just think that it's time to reconvene a discussion and a conversation going forward, and look forward to those discussions in the future. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to the sponsors of today's hearing, starting with Councilor Anissa Sabi-George in order of their arrival. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for chairing today's meeting, and thanks to all of the guests here on the panels, the guests that will give public testimony later, and those that are just here as interested parties. It's always good to see this chamber full, because the issues that we talk about here at the council, whether it's this pilot hearing today, or our education hearings, any of our hearings, it's important work. Where your elected officials doing this work, so I appreciate your presence and your attention today. Boston is, in addition to its people, it's unique in many other ways. We are wealthy in universities and colleges, hospitals, as well as cultural institutions. In fiscal year 2019, fulfilling these responsibilities cost $3.29 billion. That is basically what our city's budget is. 70% of that city's budget comes from real estate taxes collected within the city limits. Over the years, the property that institutions hold have continued to increase in value, and the cost for those services that are provided to many of those institutions falls on the taxpayers and the residents of the city of Boston. And those residents, those taxpayers in Boston, don't have an opportunity to not fulfill their requirement in paying property taxes. In fact, they are regularly reevaluated and reassessed, and always at a higher, almost always at a higher amount each time they are reassessed. I do appreciate the services that our colleges and universities, our hospitals, and our other cultural institutions bring to the city of Boston, and expect to hear over the course of the afternoon some of those special things that they bring to the city of Boston and how they add value to the experience both of residents and visitors and guests to our great city. I'd like to thank everyone for being here, like I said earlier or just before, but I have I want to share a special thank you to some of the young people that are in the audience watching government and civics in action. I look forward to a thoughtful and productive hearing today, both testimony from our panelists and testimony from our guests at public testimony, and also hope that today's hearing and subsequent hearings and working sessions will prove to be productive and lead to a recommitment of pilot payment in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi-George. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you, and I wanted to thank the administration again for coming to testify and to, I think, work together about how we can reassess this program. To me, this is about a good neighbor policy and making sure that any institution, especially multi-billion-dollar institutions that are in Boston, are part of our community and making sure that they're paying their fair share. I have several goals for today's hearing and this conversation, and to assure that, above anything else, that the information that we are getting from the city about these institutions is accurate and up to date. I want to make sure that we are also talking about ways in which the community is at the table when we do negotiate pilot agreements, be it with Massport or be it with any other exempt institution, and also making sure that when we are getting benefits for our community, that the community is actually defining them, and that we are making sure that we are not just given some sort of charity from these institutions, but that in fact they have impactful, real results in our communities. I also want to make sure that this is a day that we talk as a city about how we're going to be bold, how we're going to be creative, and how we're going to come up with solutions to make sure that these institutions are paying. I understand, and I understand this will be emphasized throughout throughout this entire hearing, that this is a voluntary program. But I want to make sure that we are the city of Boston and that we take bold steps and talk about how we can implement certain pressure points to make sure that while this is voluntary, that they are still coming to the table and that they are paying what they should be paying. I just want to make sure, again, that this is not about what's not going right, but about the solutions that we can come up with together. The amount of people who are here on August 2nd at 2 o'clock in the afternoon demonstrates, I hope, to everyone, especially the administrations, how important this issue is and that your leadership is vital in making sure we have real solutions.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo, for conducting this hearing, and I want to thank my colleagues, Councilor Lydia Edwards and Anissa Rasabi George, for your leadership on this issue. I'd like to say at the outset that our city is so thankful to the rich organizations, nonprofits that contribute to our city, medical, higher education, cultural organizations. They act as magnets for our city, attracting brain power and talent from all over the world. They offer considerable benefits to our city in terms of employment and services. They are a key part of the fabric of our city and what makes our city great. We greatly value our partnership with them. Our nonprofits institute are not required to pay property tax, which we all know our city relies heavily on. They account for between 60% and 70% of the city's revenue. In addition, Boston is limited by the revenue we can generate due to Proposition 2.5. When you factor government land and nonprofit institutions, over 50% of the land in the city is exempt from property taxes. Moreover, our nonprofit institutes benefit from being here in the city of Boston. They consume basic city services such as police, fire, EMS. To bring structure and fairness, the city organized the pilot program. They came up with a formula to work with the large nonprofits who have owned a great considerable land in our city. The city then requested 25% of what these large nonprofits would pay if they were taxable entities. This represents the part of the budget to deal with essential services. This was to be 50% in cash and 50% in community benefits, scholarships, health clinics, workshops that many of our neighborhoods depend on desperately. The city initially collected $19 million in FY 2012, a 28% increase in over 90% of what they had requested. Fiscal year 2017, pilot contributed was $32 million out of a requested $49 million. This also represented a 17% million more than the previous year. Adoption to the new guidelines in an increase of 113%. This program is all about fairness in structure, fairness between the city, its residents, and our nonprofits, fairness between our nonprofits as well. I'm looking forward to learning more about this program, learning about how these great institutions that contribute greatly to our city, helping so many residents. For example, in my district too, Tufts University is doing a lot of outreach on public health in Chinatown as it relates to some of the conditions in that neighborhood. So we're thankful to those institutions that provide great services to our city. And what I want to get out of this meeting is learning more about it, but seeing how we all can come up with a plan that works for everybody. I don't think it's about beating up on these institutions. It's about working together and trying to find common ground. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And before I hand it over to the panel for introductions and presentations, our public safety officials do not allow people to stand in the chamber. So I would ask anybody standing, there is an overflow room in the Curly room. So if you walk out and around to the desk, they'll escort you back to the Curly room to view. And if your name is called for public testimony, you will hear it in that room as well. I would also like to remind folks that, again, there's supposed to be no signs, no showing of approval and disapproval. This is an information hearing so that we can get as much information in as possible, so that we can, as a collective body and as citizens, understand the issue as well as we can. So with that, I'm sorry, Councilor Kim Janey has joined us. Do you have any opening remarks?
Just briefly, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and kudos to the sponsors of this very important hearing. Thank you so much, Councilor Edwards and Asabi George. Also want to extend my gratitude to all of the members of the audience who have joined us for this very important conversation. I, too, look forward to a productive conversation. As some of my colleagues have already said, Boston is a world-class city. We are blessed to have the best universities, the best hospitals, and the best cultural institutions in the country, and some would argue the world. They certainly offer a lot to the residents of Boston, but Boston is also a city where our residents are hurting. We're a city where we see less and less state aid, where more and more burden is placed on property tax residents. We know that 70% of the budget comes through property tax. This is an important conversation to make sure that we are all doing our fair share, that our nonprofit partners are doing their fair share, to think creatively about how we can ensure that the community, that their voice is being heard in the process. So I really look forward to a very robust and thoughtful conversation where we can come to some sort of resolution around recommendations and next steps. So again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have the conversation and that we have so many great panelists before us, this panel and the others that will be joining us, as well as public testimony. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. And again, I have to ask folks standing, please find a seat or please go to the Curly Room at this time. Thank you. Appreciate it. So now I will introduce our first panel. Who wants to start? Our CFO. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Siamo and members of the Boston City Council. My name is Emma Handy. I'm the Chief of Administration and Finance and CFO for the City of Boston. I'm joined by Gail Willett, who is our Commissioner of Assessing, and Casey Brock-Wilson, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the City of Boston. I want to state by noting something that you all have noted, which is that we have a vibrant nonprofit sector. It contributes significantly to the cultural, social, educational, and financial fabric of the city and of the entire greater Boston region. It's something that our rating agencies have recognized as a true strength of the City of Boston. Moody's has stated that the concentration of tax-exempt higher education and healthcare institutions provide an economic stimulus to Boston that benefits the sector's stable employment base. These nonprofit institutions do have private tax-exempt property that makes up about 11% of total city area and 22% of tax-exempt land. As you all have stated, real estate taxes are an important source of revenue for the City of Boston. We talked many times over the course of the FY19 budget process about the fact that our property tax base now makes up 70% of our annual operating revenue. This is the revenue that enables us to invest in parks, schools, libraries, public safety, and more, and it is critical to ensuring that the City of Boston can deliver the world-class services that we have to our residents. In order to continue to provide those services to our residents, the city adopted new guidelines in January 2011 that were recommended by the pilot task force that would encourage tax-exempt institutions to participate in the city's pilot program. The payment in lieu of taxes program is a voluntary program. It's one that has a meaningful impact on the city. It is one that, as we continue to look towards revenue maximization and ways that we can maximize revenue outside of our existing property tax base and the declining state aid that we continue to face, that we look towards ways that we can come up with other revenue options. It's something that we are continually doing in all regards, and certainly pilot is part of that. And it also has been a key priority of the mayor. It is something that he specifically asked Casey to focus on, and we've been spending quite a bit of time, particularly in the last year, really trying to align with institutions and maximize both the cash payments to the city of Boston, but also align on the community benefit portion of the program. This is a very successful voluntary program. It is a program that other cities have used as a model, and it is often cited as the most successful in the country. A recent report by our friends at the Boston Municipal Research Bureau highlighted that we've had incredible success with the program, and the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy has said that this is one of the longest standing and most revenue productive pilot programs in the United States. In FY18, the city received $33.6 million in voluntary cash contributions from our participating institution partners. We are happy to report that this is $1.2 million more than FY13, a 3% increase. Since Mayor Walsh took office in FY14, voluntary cash contributions have increased from $26 million. 37 institutions submitted community benefit reports for FY18, which resulted in $44.5 million of community benefits spending credit for that fiscal year. In sum, for FY18, the city requested $104 million of pilot contributions and received $78 million in combined cash and community benefit contributions. 74% of our FY18 request was met. As I mentioned, this is a critical program for the city of Boston. It is something that we are highly dependent on the cash contributions from our nonprofit partners, and we also continue to experience the benefits of the community benefit program and continue to work with institutions to align what those benefits look like so that we can best serve the residents of the city of Boston. I think we are primarily here to take your questions today, and so with that, I will turn it over to whatever questions you may have.
Okay. Well, why don't we let the panel present,
Sure.
and then we'll, is that fine with you? Yeah. So if no one else has to present, Sam, did you want to do your presentation?
Sure.
Okay.
As the independent, objective Boston Municipal Research Bureau, for the record, I'm Sam Tyler, president of the organization, to speak on this. And as you all know, the fiscal health of the city of Boston is one of our highest priorities. And we bring a citywide perspective as we address, each individual issue. So we have written about the heavy reliance on the property tax, which in fiscal 2019, as you've already heard, represents 70%. Maybe more importantly, it represents 85% of the total increase in revenue, which is saying something about the other revenue sources. So it's not only important because of 70%, but it's where the largest growth in revenue takes place. We've advocated for more diverse revenue sources and greater state aid for Boston. And it's with that background that I present my remarks now. So in this year, fiscal 18, Boston has completed its 7th year of implementing the new payment in lieu of tax program, involving now 47 exempt institutions. Started out at 49, but there have been 2 consolidations or mergers since then. This program, which really the first year being fiscal 12, has been very successful in terms of revenue generation, as has been noted in fiscal 2018. $33.6 million has been received by the city, an increase of $18.5 million, or 122% over the actual receipts of fiscal 11, the last year of the former program. So, in terms of revenue generation, it has been very successful. As expected, the total pilot payments have not been, or have been below the city's request. First, because the city's request was aggressive over the first 5 years. And we issued a report in 2013 in which we noted that because of the program is voluntary, requiring negotiations between the city and the institutions, We expected that initial payment would show good faith effort and come closer to where the city's request, but could be tempered in future years, reflecting further negotiations or changing economic conditions. And that's exactly what's happened. The city started with an aggressive plan. After negotiations, receipts as a percent of requests had fallen from 90.7% in fiscal 12 to 56%, 56.4% in 2018. Even so, the Boston's pilot program is considered a success, and it has, I should have checked with the CFO in terms of our notes, but the city does lead the country in terms of revenue generation. In 2010, the Lincoln Land Institute issued a report of pilot payments in cities around the country and touted Boston as the most successful in terms of revenue generation. Well, since then, the city's added $18.5 million of pilot payments, sort of solidifying the city's standing as most successful. So as much as there's concern that not enough is being paid, you compare Boston with any other city in the country, and we stand out as the #1 in terms of this program. In fiscal 2018, 51.6% of the city's total land area was exempt. But what often isn't talked about is that of that total, 78% is government publicly owned. So that the private institutions such as the medical, educational, religious, cultural represents 21.9% of land area of the city. And the medical, educational, cultural institutions make up only about 5.7% of the city's total land area. Now, there's been some comment about, well, there's been growth in land, and so we did take a look at what the breakout for public and private in the detail was over the last 30 years. And there's a lot of detail with that, but all in all, it basically is saying that in proportion to the city's total land, there's been relatively little growth in the exempt property. And where there has been growth, it's been more at the state level than the private. And so the cultural, educational, medical institutions, which represent 5.7% of total land area, 30 years ago, it was a little over 5%. So it's relatively stable in that respect. The current pilot program is a more standardized approach than its predecessor in that it applies equally to now 47 private exempt institutions with property values of $15 million or more. Before, it was a sort of a piecemeal approach that it only applied if an institution needed a zoning variance or building permits in order for a new building. So if your institution was building, then you were paying more pilot payments than if you weren't, but even if you had the same amount of value. So, and the city wasn't valuing property back then. So this is a much improved system, and it has proven to be successful, again, in terms of revenue. The medical institutions in aggregate over the 7 years increased their payments, considerably paid in fiscal, I guess this last year, their payments were about 87% of the city's request, slightly down from the 96% in fiscal 12. But those payments from the medical institutions represent about 72% of the total pilot payments. Now, my comments do not reflect, the Massport pilot, which is also significant, but this is really just dealing with the private. So each year since fiscal 12, well, let me say the educational institutions have increased their payments. I mean, I know they are being raised as an issue where more could be done, but over the 7 years, they have increased their pilot payments by over $5 million, a 57% increase. But each year, what they provide is less, percentage-wise, less than what the city has asked, going from about 88% in fiscal 12 to 39% in fiscal 18. But it's still, you know, again, it's based on the voluntary negotiation, voluntary payments and negotiations. Any evaluation of the pilot program, as has been noted, should really fully consider the significant contributions of the medical, educational, and cultural institutions that they make to the city, the regional economy, and the importance of the quality of life in the metropolitan area. By employing a large workforce, attracting billions in research grants, fostering startup communities, providing services directly to residents, and adding to Boston's popularity as a destination city, these institutions are an integral component of the economic strength of Boston. Businesses are attracted to locate in Boston because of the resources provided by these institutions and the talented workforce in the area. I won't repeat what our chief financial officer stated about you know, the rating agencies and their comments in terms of the importance of the exempt institutions to the economy. In recent years, tax-exempt institutions have continually added jobs to the Boston economy. Of the top 10 employers in Boston, 8 are tax-exempt institutions, supporting about 75,000 jobs within that top 10 group. The economy is growing in the life sciences and biotechnology industries, supported in good part through the National Institute of Health, NIH grants, located in the city. For 23 consecutive years, Boston has been awarded the largest amount of NIH funding of all cities in the country. This is according to a 2018 report by the BPDA. And of the $1.97 billion received in 2017, 97% was awarded to the tax-exempt medical and educational institutions in Boston, indicating their critical role expanding the economy and creating jobs. So I would end by saying that this Boston pilot program is a success. It has resulted both in significant increases in pilot payments and community services. It's a voluntary program. It requires negotiation between the city and the exempt institutions, and to expect full payment to an aggressive schedule set by the city, I think, is unrealistic. This is not the panacea for solving the city's fiscal problems. There is area for growth, no question about it, but you know, you're not going to see this kind of success in any other city in the country. Now, there is, if I leave it with one issue, I mean, with all these jobs, it's the state that benefits from the income tax, not the city. So that would be one area that, not that the city's had a lot of success with the state lately, but that would be a, you know, a legitimate area to look at in terms of Boston sharing some of that revenue. So thank you.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification. A lot of the universities, colleges, even medical institutions have retail spaces and commercial spaces. Just for clarification, could someone speak to that kind of taxation that's kind of blended in and how it's distinguished from taxable versus being exempt?
Sure.
So they are taxed under regular Chapter 59, just like any other property owner. If it's a hospital that, say, has an Oban pan on the first floor, so that is, square footage is separated out. It is applied with a tax rate similar to other commercial properties of a similar use in that neighborhood. And so they're paying full commercial rate Chapter 59 taxes on that.
And we don't have like an idea of how that's separated out. I mean, like I'm thinking BU is an urban campus, ComAv, lots of retail, versus BC, more of a less urban campus, I guess. Just, you know, do we separate like how much they pay because they are they have a non-exempt property as well?
No, I don't think that we've ever looked at it that way. I mean, they get a regular tax bill just like everybody else, so it comes in as part of the property taxes. But no, I don't think we've ever done an analysis like that.
Okay. Let me give it to the sponsors. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Chairman, again, and thank you all, Emma, for your presentation, and Sam for your presentation, and the rest of you for your questions ahead of time. Can you tell me a little bit about how the property has changed, the land mass, the land use has changed over time? Because Sam's saying that there hasn't been a lot of institutional growth, but I'm curious over a period of 5 and 10 years, what has changed? Because there is this feeling of creep across many of our neighborhoods in the city that institutions are growing. So if we talk a little bit about the actual land use changes.
Sure. I don't think we have the details with us today, but we certainly could get you a look, 5 and 10 years back. Gail, is there anything at a higher level that you would say about that?
I think the other thing that happens is institutions sell things and they buy things, so it's going in both directions. I think that certainly when they buy things, that is very noticeable for people, but it may not be as noticeable when they sell things.
Councilor, we've prepared a table I can share with you that shows the change broken down by the different exempt clauses or uses for each of the decades from 1988 to 2018. So it covers a 30-year period, but we have it broken down by decade.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
I should one thing I also would add, and there are exempt properties or institutions who buy property and keep those properties on the tax roll. So it's not, when you're looking at the breakout, you're not capturing it all because some are still taxable.
I appreciate that, thank you. And then do we know so we talked a little bit about, or you presented a little bit about the success of Boston's pilot program. Mm-hmm. How do we measure success, and what is the comparison that's being made between cities?
Sure. So I think in that regard, I'm talking about sort of volume of cash payments.
But Boston has a lot more institutions than other cities, so
Sure.
it's volume as opposed to percentage?
So, like I said, in that regard, I'm specifically talking about cash payments in the door. I do want to make clear that I think the City of Boston's position is that there is more to do. We have been successful, but certainly we are supportive of the guidelines of the 2011 agreement. And so while we are a very successful program, we agree that there is progress to be made, and we certainly continue to stress the importance, in particular for the City of Boston's budget, of the cash payments, but certainly of providing community benefits as part of the larger program as well.
Thank you. And then speaking of payments, one of the things that's frustrating to me is when we're paying institutions to use their facilities, and any of their institutions. Do we have an idea of how much we actually spend as a city, whether it's the City of Boston or the Boston Public Schools, because BPS pays to use some of that space? Do we have an idea of how much we've spent with universities?
I don't have that number. It's something we could certainly try to look at the data to see if it's discernible. We may have to sort of ask the question to our departments.
I think that's a really important question, because any of these institutions that are not, and most of them are not fulfilling their commitment to the pilot program, that then we're writing them a check, whether it's for ice time, whether it's for a graduation, whether it's for any of their space for any purpose. To me, that I have a problem with us writing that check. We should be taking it out of, some sort of accounting formula. We're taking it out of their debit column.
Yes, I certainly understand that point. The nature of the voluntary program would mean that we cannot compel an institution to gift us something, right? And so while we might work with them and try to come up with an agreement along the same lines, we can't sort of through back office city finance function credit and debit based on the various expenditures and revenue that are coming in from these particular institutions because they are tax exempt. So if it's in lieu of taxes, it sort of triggers this tax exempt issue.
I still think it would be an interesting dollar amount to
Yes.
understand how much we're spending at different institutions and why. And then I know that you have 37 community benefit reports. Sam mentioned that there are 47 that are exempt. Are we missing 10? Is there a reason why we don't have those 10 reports?
Yes.
We are missing 10 reports. Because it is a voluntary program, it's the choice of each institution whether they choose to submit a community benefit report. We know many of the institutions who don't submit reports are still doing community benefits, but we're unable to track them without the report.
Great. Thank you, Casey, for that. If you could actually share the list of who's missing. I know that, I think I have it in my notes, but if it would be pretty clear, that would be great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Edwards?
So I just want to start out with the information and the numbers and make sure that we're talking about accurate, up-to-date numbers. Any of the numbers that you've stated so far in terms of what is owed is based off of the 2012 assessment of the property. Am I correct? Or is it based off an annual assessment of the property values?
It's not based off an annual assessment. It is, I believe, based off the 2011 task force guidelines.
So when we're talking about the numbers and the assessed values, we're talking about this property that they have based off of 2011 values, right? So that's why I think it's very hard to judge the success of this program and to pat ourselves on the back when we're not talking about 2018 values of property, which have gone up exponentially, at least for me and my tax bill. So when we're doing this kind of analysis, I think it's really important for the city to take leadership and to do that assessment. Can the city do that assessment and give us accurate data about what is actually these properties are assessed at?
Certainly, a reassessment is possible. It's not something we've pursued to date because we've been focused on getting to 100% implementation with the existing cash benefit portion of the program. It is obviously a fairly significant undertaking and something that we want to be sure that we have aligned on the goal of doing the reassessment and what we will ultimately receive by doing a reassessment. And so that's why for us, the first step has been to focus on 100% implementation of the guidelines. Certainly, a reassessment is something that is feasible.
So I appreciate that, noting that it seems to be the priority of the city to work on 2011 numbers and at least getting that to 100% versus getting the 2018 values. So I guess I'm also curious in terms of accurate information, why aren't all of the tax exempt institutions that own property in the city of Boston listed on our website?
Can you give an example? Sorry.
Massport and their pilot payments are not listed.
So this is just these nonprofit. So Massport is not a nonprofit, basically. This is the nonprofit program, the pilot program.
But does pay pilot payments.
It's a separate pilot program, yes.
Right. So to the city of Boston.
Yes.
So I'm asking that information be put out there publicly for the city of Boston if we're going to talk about where the money's coming from, if we're talking about pilot payments, that all the information and the pilot payments be made available.
Sure.
Right. And then also when we're talking about, there's exempt other institutions that have alternative tax payments that may not be within the pilot program. And I'm just curious, when the city is negotiating those and when those agreements, this is under 121A, could the city be making that information available as well?
It is.
It is on the website. All of the contracts and the agreements are
Of the 121A?
Of the 121A, of the 121B,
Of the payment
of the
plans?
TIFs.
Okay.
The payment amounts, no. The contracts are available on the webpage. The payment amounts would be available going through the collector's site.
Okay.
So with the ward and parcel or the address, you would be able to look up any of the payment information.
And then we would be able to see how much the payment plan has been put in and how much we haven't or have received.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
We would be able to see if there's any gap in the
Yes,
payments.
but
Yeah,
that's also something that the collector is looking at
Okay.
and reviewing and in assessing. We're looking at and reviewing and making sure that the payments that were expected to come in have actually come in.
So when it comes to these quasi-government institutions, I'm specifically talking about the BPDA, and I'm curious why the city is actually enabled under state law on 121B, if you want to look into language, it says you may negotiate with an authority or an agency such as the BPDA or Housing Authority to actually come up with payment in lieu of taxes, though they are a tax-exempt institution. I'm wondering why, or if the city would ever consider negotiating with the BPDA for them to actually make some payments as well.
So I think it would be, first of all, a separate discussion, obviously, because they are a city government agency and not.
They're separate from us, right?
They are
don't
separate
get
from
our
us, yes.
tax dollars.
But in terms of the sort of general structure, we have the sort of the tax-exempt institutions. We've got Massport, we've got 121A, 121B, which generally are for parcels that would otherwise be taxable. And so the BPDA is really, well, not part of the city of Boston, a city government function. BPDA properties my understanding is they have a variety of tax agreements. So some pay Chapter 59 taxes, some do have their own individual pilot agreements, a few do not, and those are generally properties that have an agreement that may be a 99-year lease and we're in year 50 or 60 or 70, so it's a very long-term lease from a period in time where in order to get somebody in that property, they basically had to waive the right for us to collect any type of property agreement, tax agreement. So there is some variety in terms of the types of parcels that the BPDA has and whether we are collecting taxes on those. Under this mayor, the BPDA has gone through the process of updating as many ground leases as they can and adding pilot agreements and in many cases Chapter 59 taxes to those agreements when we can, so that we are maximizing our ability to collect taxes on the parcels that are overseen by the BPDA.
Right, but you have not engaged in actual payments from the BPDA as a landlord or property owner.
No, because when we do collect taxes, they are paid for generally by the tenant of the parcel.
Right.
So even when in a 121A, 121B, that tax saving is eventually passed down, right, to the parcel.
So my understanding is I'm a landlord. My tenants would pay taxes and so on and so forth, and then I also pay taxes. So as a landlord and property owner for the city of Boston, so why wouldn't we treat the BPDA like a normal Bostonian who does pay both? I'm just curious about, like I said, I wanted leadership. I wanted to see some innovative ways of making sure that we're bringing all institutions to the table to be more equitable. So yes, we are getting something from the BPDA. I'm asking why we wouldn't ask for more.
So because we're taxing, basically because the tax follows the parcel, right? And so if the tenant is paying a tax, the property taxes are assessed to a parcel. And so those individual agreements with various BPDA tenants determine the amount of taxes paid.
Okay, so I'm just going to say it again, and I'll move on for the next round or something, but this is a may in the state statute, so it's not, if you're choosing not to, then I would prefer the city just say we don't want to, but it's a may, it's an option, and I think the city should consider it.
But I think the other part of it is the 121A and the 121B agreements are, the BPDA is a party to it, the assessing department is a party to it, the developer is a party to it, or the tenant or whoever the agreement is with. And so it's not, in the 121As and the 121Bs, it's not necessarily that they're the ownership, that they certainly have an interest in the property, but the property is really still owned by the developers, such as the Manulife building in South Boston.
So two examples, Rayfin Park and Charlestown Navy Yard are owned by the BPDA, and I believe that BPDA makes $61 million a year, right? So just straight out ownership, they own that, they make money off of it. And so there's a may clause in the state law that allows for you to consider asking for, in lieu of taxes, some form of payment. So I'm asking you to consider that kind of thought process. They're making money off a property in Boston. So like if I were to, I pay my actual taxes. So that's all I'm bringing up under 121B.
Well, Councilor, there's not a formal agreement that you're talking about there, but there is
I'm
somewhat
fully aware.
informal.
I just brought up the language that says may.
Yeah,
So that's all I'm asking for the city to consider.
I'm just saying to you that there are other ways in which the BPDA is making contributions to the city in terms of its resources supporting other city functions. So it's not like they're not doing anything.
And I haven't said that.
Okay, I'm just making sure that there's,
Yeah, I'm very
there's
clear. and
more
I
full
think I wanna
pictures
be-
out there.
Yeah, no, the full picture is out there for many people, but I think the question and I appreciate the defense of the BPDA, but I want to be clear, I'm not attacking or saying they're not doing anything. I'm asking for this department to consider the May that is out there under state law.
Counselor, I think the May allows us to execute these 121A, 121B agreements, which allows for us to either charge Chapter 59 taxes or negotiate a pilot or something like that. Certainly, we can look at the language that you're raising. Happy to talk more about it. I think we have used the 121A, 121B option to try to come up with aligning economic development goals with maximizing tax collections, regardless of who is ultimately paying those taxes.
All right, and I'll wait till the next round.
I just have a quick, again, clarifying. So UMass Boston has a lot of land in the Dorchester Harbor. Do we have a May clause with them to pay any property taxes for that acreage that they have?
So there's a state program, a state pilot program, which is really set by the appropriation that the state gives to it every year. So basically, whatever the ultimate dollar amount is that they determine as part of the annual budget process, that sort of filters out across the state in terms of how much reimbursement is given to cities and towns.
So do we get a portion of that? So the whole state gets something out of UMass Boston? We don't get
Sorry,
anything?
that line item itself is really not within UMass Boston. It's, for state land in general.
State land in
Yep.
general. So we get a portion for the JFK and Ashburton and so on and so forth?
Not all of the parcels, but some of the parcels, UMass being one of them. We do get reimbursed on state-owned land. There's some juvenile facilities in Hyde Park we get reimbursed on, some properties in Fenway. It is not every state.
And is it at
piece
the
of
same
land.
rate, or is it a reduced rate, I would imagine?
I do not believe it is at the same rate as
Right.
general property
So it's
taxes.
sort of it's at their will.
Right, right.
Right, okay. And I'm sure
Subject
it's
to
not a lot.
appropriation, as all things are at the
Like,
state level,
and-
right?
and
Yeah.
Probably declining like state aid. Okay. Counselor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Gilmore. Thank you, Councilor Seymour. And thank you to the panelists for being here. In the interest of fairness, I know some nonprofits are paying this year and some are not making that commitment. My question would be, what steps could be taken to encourage those nonprofits that are not paying their share to pay their fair share, to contribute, to be more engaged in the city?
I think we are focused on building positive working relationships with each of the institutions. 7 years into the program, educating everybody on what the pilot program is and trying to improve payments, as well as collecting more information on community benefits. And like Emma said, our goal is really to reach 100% participation of the current program.
Is there any type of outreach where some organizations throughout the city can meet some of these nonprofits, some of these great colleges, universities, hospitals, let them tell their story about why these services or why funding is critically needed to support our neighborhoods in Boston? But is there a connection between the nonprofits that contribute and the people of Boston that really need these services and depend on the nonprofits in the city as well?
So I think that's a great idea. Many of these institutions are located in and near Boston neighborhoods, and I think already have connections with many of their communities. And so building on that, I think, is a great idea.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is, we're still working on processing the 37 community benefit reports from this year, but we'll be posting them on the website later this year. What you'll see as you look through them is a variety of programs that have been developed over the course of time, organically, in conjunction with residents, interested professors, students, a combination of different kind of things have kind of jump-started each of these community benefit programs that are reported to date.
Are we communicating with the nonprofits, maybe the hospitals, medical institutions, identifying critical issues impacting the city, whether it be substance abuse, public health, and kind of targeting their community benefits to certain issues that impact that neighborhood or impact the city?
So I'm going to have Casey talk about this more because this is a lot of what she has been focused on. I think that the public community-driven processes that the city has undertaken around long-term planning, like Imagine Boston 2030, Go Boston, all of those processes have really helped to clearly define what a lot of those community priorities are. And so the city has really emphasized aligning with those various priorities and focuses that the city itself tries to align its budget with, and then in partnership with our institutions. So it's certainly something that we continue to try to get better alignment with institutions on. The benefits themselves are also part of this voluntary program, and so we work closely with institutions to identify new opportunities and to work with them so that we can continue to align, particularly in the future, on what those might be. But it is difficult for us to sort of directly link the two because of the nature of the program.
I'll just add 2 comments to that. The first being that we obviously work with many of these institutions outside of the pilot program, right? Whether it's on substance abuse or many other issues. And sometimes those benefits aren't quantifiable, so they're not included in community benefits reports, but we know that we're working with them in a variety of different manners, even if they're not quantifiable. The second thing I'd add is that through the hospital specifically have a joint CHNA-CHIP process, which is a community health needs assessment and implementation plan that has an exhaustive community process, as well as includes members of BPHC and the public health community as a part of that.
Thank you, and I just have one question for Sam. Sam, do you have any recommendations on how we can work closer with the nonprofits in the city, encouraging them to pay their fair share or provide more community benefits? What is the attitude of some of these nonprofits in the city?
Well, I think that, basically the way the administration is working in terms of trying to develop better relationships, working with the institutions, but in the end, it is voluntary and it's up to them based on their situation as to how much they can pay. I think certainly this kind of a hearing brings that issue open more. There's no way to compel them, the institutions, to make the payments. It's more of the relationship building, I think, than anything else. I don't think embarrassing or bullying is going to be productive at all. So it's really a relationship issue under current Massachusetts law.
I just want to say thank you to the panelists for being here and taking my questions.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Janey.
Thank you. So as I opened up, I talked about the contributions of our educational and cultural and hospitals in Boston, but not all Boston residents access those equally or utilize them equally. And so while I appreciate your earlier comments about the jobs, Sam, I think you said that of the top 10 employers, 8 are these nonprofit employers. How many jobs are you actually talking about?
I think I was talking about 75,000 jobs.
75,000 jobs? How many of those jobs were for Boston residents versus residents that live Newton, Brookline, Randolph, Stoughton, Canton, Cambridge?
I think, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a breakdown of that.
Do you have a breakdown of whether these jobs are high-paying jobs or low-paying jobs?
There's no detail in the information that's available, but I think it's a mix throughout, but no specific, spreadsheets or information that brings out that detail.
And I ask because, as you highlight here, These institutions are, I guess, economic engines for the city of Boston, but the question really is who's benefiting from that economic spur in the city of Boston. So, you know, I care very much about making sure that the residents of Boston can partake in these great institutions. As I said, they're great institutions. They contribute to the fabric of Boston and what makes Boston a great world-class city. But if so many residents are still being left out through usage, whether it's who goes to which hospitals, who goes to our museums, who's able to get into our universities, in addition to who actually holds a job, then I worry. I appreciate the city taking a stance that certainly more could be done. And as you work to get to 100%, I'm hoping that you can speak more to what that actually looks like. I'll address that to the CFO.
Sure, Councilor.
Chief Handy,
Can you say
thank
more
you.
about what you mean?
So you said earlier, it was in response, I think, to
Yep.
an earlier question,
Yes.
that the goal really has been to get to
Yes.
100%.
Yep.
Versus should we update the assessed
sure.
value for 2018, which I wholeheartedly agree with.
Yep.
So let me be clear in saying that.
Sure.
I think we should be looking at the assessed value of what property is worth now today, because as everyone knows in this room, we have seen them skyrocket. And so on the one hand, we have folks, our nonprofit partners who certainly contribute a lot to the city of Boston, are not doing, 75% is great, but there's 25% out there that we're not getting. And certainly you want to get to 100%, but we're
Right.
not even doing the assessed values that we should be doing. So
Right.
when you say we're trying to work
Yes.
toward 100%,
I gotcha.
what exactly does that look
Sure.
like?
So on the cash side, which is the side that has the most discretion for the city of Boston, because it becomes revenue to the city that we can then prioritize within the annual budget process, I mean 100% of the cash payments as set out by that 2011 task force. And there is also room for improvement on the community benefit side, right? We had previously mentioned that we are still missing community benefit reports, which means that we cannot acknowledge that those community benefits have happened. And so we still need more information from from nonprofit partners about what those community benefits are. And so 100% participation in community benefits reporting, as well as 100% participation and 100% of that cash as part of that cash program.
And so when you talk about, let's talk about community benefit programming. So we don't have all the reports in. Who determines what that community benefit will look like and whether or not that community benefit is truly benefiting Boston?
Right.
And then again, I'm going to say for all of those who have been kind of left out and whether or not they're getting the jobs, the 75,000 jobs that Sam mentioned, whether or not they're able to attend one of these universities or have one of their kids attend the university, whether they are getting their care at one of these wonderful world-class hospitals, who gets to determine what that benefit looks like and whether or not it really is truly a benefit to the community,
Sure.
particularly those who are being left out?
So I will let Casey answer this because she will certainly say this in the most thoughtful way, but the institutions are deciding what the community benefits are because this is a voluntary program. What we do when those reports are submitted to the City of Boston is look at those reports and confirm that the value, the institution's reported value of those benefits equals what 50% discount would equal, and look for anything that would be truly ineligible under those 2011 guidelines. And so we are not doing an individualized review, community by community, institution by institution, of the relative value of that benefit for that community or the institution or whatever it may be, because these are ultimately selected by the institution as their community benefits. And because it is part of this overall program that is by definition voluntary because of their tax exempt status and our linkage of community benefits to tax exempt payment in lieu of tax exempt status. That's sort of the framework that we are working under.
Can I,
I think it's helpful just to go back to the task force documents from 2010. And they just specifically define community benefits as those that directly benefit City of Boston residents. And so we've worked with the institutions to ensure that it's at least an estimate for some public events of how many of the attendees were from the City of Boston, for example. They are supposed to support the city's mission, address the needs of the community, and leverage the skills and capabilities of the institutional partners. And so you'll see that with particularly, medical institutions. Oftentimes they're working with, they're choosing community benefits and investing in areas that are their specialty, and giving back in that way to the community. The other piece that the guidelines set forth was that these services are above and beyond the tax-exempt organization's business model. And in general, the categories that should be included for pilot community benefits are participation in city initiatives, provision of public services, policy-based collaborations, and medical care, and so on.
So I can go into, I guess, more depth with the next panel on community benefits. I asked my question because I was curious to see whether or not the city played a role in shaping what it looks like. And I'm also very interested in making sure that the community, since it's supposed to benefit the community, also has a say in that. And I ask this because coming, from education advocacy, we see many of the schools in our district have community partners. And then the question really becomes, how are those community partners really serving the needs, the individual needs of the children at that school? And I think what our school department has found and what they're trying to rectify is that sometimes there is a mismatch. And so I think there's some work that can be done, but I can save that for the next panel. I did want to come to some
sure.
numbers.
Can I just add something to that, because I participated in numerous master plans over the years. So every institution, college, medical, have to provide the city with a 10-year master plan. There are task force that are appointed through nominations, and the mayor and the BPDA conducts those meetings with the community. And usually community benefits are negotiated through the task force, through that public process of the master planning of their goals and desires for a 10-year stretch. So I wanted to just add that in, that, when you say the city, they give us what they want, but there is a process within each community. For example, Boston College, Harvard, and BU all have to go through a somewhat lengthy master planning process where they present their plans to the neighborhood over a series of meetings, and at the end, when there is some common ground on those projects, then community benefits are negotiated, put in a cooperation agreement, and during the extent of that master plan, that 10-year master plan, community benefits are supposed to be coming forth for the community.
I appreciate that. I would still strongly suggest that there is room for improvement in the community input and engagement process, that oftentimes when these master planning sessions, whether we're talking about real estate, whether we're talking about community benefits with, higher ed institution, that whoever is being invited to the table are not necessarily the people who could benefit the most from a community benefit, and particularly if we're talking about being serious and intentional about closing the gaps. So, I talked about Boston being a world-class city, but the question still remains for who has access, who's being left out, who's being, so that's why I asked that. But if I could, in my remaining minutes, just kind of come through some of the numbers. So 75%, so we've got room for improvement because we need to get to 100%. Everyone agrees. I'm not sure I'm clear on what the strategies or steps or tools that you're using to kind of get us there, but, and I asked, but I want to just go through. So if I'm looking at the educational nonprofits, there's 21 total here. According to my quick read, I've got 9 of the 21, so less than half, have given 75% or more. Only 6, and so 75% or more being a C, or C plus, or C. 6 have given 85% more, only five have given 100% more, and there's one that's only given 10%. And the ask for that one was only $3.5 million. And when you think about, again, I don't want to pick on folks, but because we know the benefits of these institutions, everyone's highlighted them, $3 million in the big scheme of things doesn't sound like a lot of money when you look at what these institutions have in terms of their own operating budgets. When I look at the medical, 16 total, now they're doing the best overall, so I don't know if you're able to kind of highlight them as examples. I don't know what strategies are working here that we see many of them doing what they should be doing. Are you able to then, do you have a sense of why this is? Let's start there.
So to your previous question, I just want to say that the collection of pilot cash in particular has long been a priority for the assessing department, administration and finance, the CFO. In the past year plus, Casey's position was created with this being one of the key components of her responsibilities to maximize this program is something that has been a priority for the mayor and something he is focused on. So to your first question about what are we doing about it, this is what we're doing about it. We've created a point person who works basically hand in glove with the assessing department, who is actually responsible for the day-to-day of this program and who is communicating constantly with these institutions to try to maximize the impact of the program. Do you want to answer the second question?
Can you repeat the second question?
The question here with the medical institutions, that they are just kind of doing much better than some of the others. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts as to why you have much more success with them versus others.
I don't have anything specific to share. I think it might be a good question for one of the other panels, but I think it's a trend we've seen over the past couple of years.
I would say there's, I think, a long-standing divide in terms of how much room there is for improvement in those two categories.
I think then finally, and I will end here, we've just seen a decline in terms of the percentage of what's coming in. Is that fair to say?
So
Over the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years?
So this is
Since it's
probably going into the numbers maybe a little bit too much, but this year, as you noticed, we changed the format of the way we reported the pilot payments on the website. And one thing that is different this year is we didn't give a community benefits credit to institutions who did not submit community benefits program, whereas in the past that we did. And so it's not really a year-to-year comparison to compare this spreadsheet to the last spreadsheet. If we were calculating it the same way as last year, it would actually be a slight increase of participation from 65% to 66%. But this year, because we calculated it a different way and we wanted to be true to the institutions who did submit community benefit programs, that's kind of why we saw the big decrease this year.
And has there been an increase in the amount owed over time?
Not since 2011, right? So we're still functioning, right, under the same.
Well, so in 2011, we kind of phased in. So based on the value in 2011, 2012 was 20% ramp, 40%, until we reached 100% in 2016 of the 2011 values. And then for 2017 and 2018, we've been doing a 2.5% escalation on the value.
In dollars, so not percentage, the dollars.
Yes,
Right.
dollars.
I'm going to save the rest of my questions for the next panel. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Counselor, before you continue, I just need to say that I'm sorry I have to leave in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
I have a long-standing flight, so I
Okay.
apologize for the conflict.
Okay,
but-
thank you. Thank you. And
okay with questions.
Counselor Edwards?
Yeah, I just wanted to get into some of the enforcement then questions about what can and can't be done. And I'm particularly, I understand this is a voluntary program, and so in as much as, but I do want to pick up on the line of questioning from Councilor Asabi George. In as much as there are benefits coming from the City of Boston, zoning relief given to these institutions, any way in which they're coming to us and asking for something, why aren't we reminding them that they're derelict in their payments?
So I think because it is a tax-exempt program, the participation under pilot is really a function of participation and, as you said at the beginning, being a good neighbor and contributing to the City of Boston's programs. We don't have a basis for linking disparate, separate city processes with the collection of pilot benefits because we don't, frankly, have a right to charge them taxes or anything else. In lieu of taxes, it has to be voluntary. And so,
But a reminder, you're getting this zoning relief for us, which we think is valued at X from the City of Boston. You owe us this. Or making it publicly available, showing all the benefits that they've gotten, all the zoning variances that they've asked for. Every single time that a check comes from the City of Boston to any of these institutions should be on a list. And then right next to it in the next column, how much they owe us in pilot payments. I think a lot of that is helpful with public pressure. And the ability for us to really sit at the table with truly informed individuals, because I don't believe that this is something the City of Boston is going to be able to do by itself. We need everyone in this room, but we need the information from the City of Boston. So that means, I think, annual assessments, updated information, but also showing what we're giving these institutions in a monetized way. And to speak to some of the comments, I wanted to be very, I wasn't sure if the city had followed. I was extremely excited that in the most recent tax bill, the one thing that I liked from the federal government was that they had agreed to tax Harvard's endowment. Are you aware of that?
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so so Harvard's endowment is now considered taxable. And so when we talk about bold action and leadership, and I want, since you're the assessor and since you're looking at this, I would love for us to talk about how then why we aren't looking at a form. If the IRS is saying that you're taxable, why the City of Boston isn't as well.
So under Mass state law, these are also tax-exempt institutions, so it would certainly require a change in state law. I think any change of that magnitude is something that I frankly don't know what the impact would be across the City of Boston. As you heard from us and from the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, these are critical institutions to the City of Boston. And if we were to pursue something as significant as a change in that status, I think that's something that we would really need to understand what that impact would look like.
So just for other people's knowledge, it's 1.4% on the endowments of institutions that have 500 students or more, where their endowment is about $500,000 per student, and just expected to raise in the next 10 years $1.8 billion nationwide. That would apply to Harvard, MIT, Amherst, Williams, Wellesley, and Smith, Harvard being the only one, I think, in actual all of City of Boston. So again, I would love to see some bold leadership and creative thought. If the IRS under this administration is willing to do this, I think the City of Boston could try to think of some other forms as well. Also, I do understand that the City of Boston is negotiating right now pilot payments with Massport. Their agreement is automatically renewed every single year. To pick up on the line of questioning from my colleague, Councilor Janey, about the community being at the table, who is negotiating right now with Massport, and who from the community is represented at that table?
I don't have the latest on that, so I'd have to follow up with you.
Okay. And then just to make clear, there is not a citywide definition of community benefits, right? This is...
So we use regarding the pilot payment program, we use the community benefit definition from the 2011 report.
So in as much as would the city be open to having a community committee or commission that actually helps to develop the guidelines for what actual benefits would be for our community?
So I think certainly we're open to discussing anything that continues to enhance this program. I do think that when we have previously gone back to reassess parts of this program, that it has been a comprehensive review and that it's been a major undertaking and has really balanced all, both the contributors, the community, and others. And so I think that's critical to any path forward in terms of continuing to strengthen the program. I think that defining community benefits is helpful. It's certainly something that continued community involvement, enhanced community involvement in defining those benefits with the institutions, I think is a good thing. At the end of the day, we can only measure to a guideline that ultimately is a guideline, right? Because it's a voluntary program.
Right, but ideally the guideline is then coming from the community first. And then when I hear about the zoning, for example, and variances being provided or not to these institutions. I think that we do it right now when it comes to other developers. We require or we negotiate linkage payments. We require negotiate IDP. We do all sorts of things when we link their zoning benefits to housing. We link their zoning benefits to benefits for our community right now with the other developers. So when Harvard or any of these institutions act like developers, why aren't we treating them like that?
So, I don't work for the BPDA, but from what I understand, like any development in Boston, there is a public process for determining community benefits for many of these tax-exempt institutions through the institutional master plans that the counselor was discussing earlier, under Article 80 of the Boston Zoning Code.
Right.
So there is a public process with that, and the BPDA can provide further details about
Right.
what that looks like.
Right. But just to be clear, the zoning, for example, isn't up, like the 13% IDP isn't up for a community process. It is implemented. Those are things that are just put on and required. And so to me, that's linking the zoning to a benefit or to being able to build in the city of Boston. And so when they act like builders and are building in the city of Boston, why aren't we holding them to the same standard? They have more money than a lot of these developers do. So why aren't we requiring more?
Because we don't have the legal framework to do it.
When they act like developers and they're,
So if it's a taxable purpose, it is being taxed under Chapter 59, but if it is for the non-tax purpose of the institution, we don't have the legal framework under which to charge them Chapter 59 taxes, or even in lieu of that, to ask for other things such as benefits.
all right. So I think, I appreciate that answer. I know you're pressed for time, but I think that the legal framework and that analysis we should be thinking about how that changed, since the IRS has found that certain parts or institutions are taxable in certain ways. I mean, those endowments, I'm sure, are directly linked to real estate that they own in Boston. So to a certain extent, they are being taxed for that land. So I think I look forward to a greater in-depth conversation about how we're going to lead in making sure that we get what I feel are payments owed to the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. I know you have to go, so if you
Yes.
want to excuse yourself
you.
at this point, I'd like
Apologize
to, but you folks that came in later, I'm going to have to ask you to find seats, and if you can't, there's overflow also in the curly room behind me, and you can go around that way. And I do believe, just to clarify, they do pay linkage fees and into the Jobs Trust as well. I sit on the Jobs Trust, so I know they contribute when they have institutional projects.
Okay.
Okay. Council Flynn, anybody else? Council Janey.
So I was hoping that someone could speak more to the tax exempt land that is controlled by the state or owned by the state. What kind of arrangements are being made there? It's a considerable chunk of land. What arrangements currently exist? And are there folks, how are they doing? Are they also not fulfilling their full commitment?
Council Janey, that came up earlier, and I think the answer is that the state has its own program in terms of state aid and provisions for state-owned property. It's weak. It doesn't fund it as it should. I think there's a time when Governor Romney had a proposal that was going to more fully fund, and Boston was poised to receive substantially more money, but that never made it through the legislature. So it's not a city issue as much of it is it's a state program that's part of the cherry sheet state aid, and so that's where that issue needs to be addressed.
Well, one question or thought that came up, and I think it was the CFO who may have mentioned it, or maybe it was you, I'm not sure, Sam, was how the city could benefit from this revenue and share in it. Was that your earlier point?
I guess my point was that there's 75,000 jobs in these exempt institutions, and the state benefits from the income tax, but the city doesn't.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so what thoughts do you have to ensure that the city could benefit and share in that revenue?
Well, I think the state has its own fiscal problems, so they're not likely to quickly give up revenue to the city. So I don't know that there's
Well,
any.
they do, and their problems are our problems because less and less of our revenue is coming through the state, and therefore there's more of a burden in terms of taxpayers, particularly residents, if in fact our nonprofit institutions aren't doing all that they can. So, you know, we're kind of pinched here, and so do you have any ideas around how we go after them, whether they're pinched or not?
Well, I think that, you know, the issues that have been addressed and continue to be addressed and were not addressed yesterday in any legislative action, you know, there's the standard, you know, charter school tuition reimbursement, which is not being fully funded.
Exactly.
And, you know, that's worth, you know, more a push from a wider community. Just general Chapter 78. I mean, Boston gets for a, you know, a school budget that's over $1 billion, the 1.9 or so million dollar increase in Chapter 70 is, it doesn't really help at all.
Exactly, so we're
it's-
not getting that. I want to come to a point that I think Gail made earlier. You said we were reimbursed on some state land. So how much, what percentage, and are they at, what percentage of land, and then how much in terms of dollars, what percentage of dollars?
I don't have in front of me either of those numbers. I know about 3 years ago, we revisited our state-owned land reimbursements with the state to try to increase that amount. I can certainly get that for you at a later point.
I appreciate that.
But it is not a substantial amount of money.
Okay. Do you have a sense of whether or not they're fulfilling their obligation, as Sam has already mentioned, and as many people in this chamber know, that the state has not been fulfilling its obligation in terms of reimbursements? Do you have a sense of whether or not because it's subject to appropriation, are they in fact doing what they're supposed to be doing with the reimbursements? Or do you have to get that to me later too?
Well, I mean, on the state-owned land, we certainly had discussed with them that, you know, the way that we would like it looked at is what would a developer pay for this site, or what could be done with this site? And that's certainly not the route that the state uses for determining the value of state-owned land. They look at it as how many single-family houses could be built on this location, which certainly creates a much lower value than what a large commercial development would be, which is what is happening in most of the city.
And then last thing, and this is to Councilor Sabi George's earlier point around, I think you called it creep. What did you call it? This expansion?
Institutional creep,
Institutional creep.
not a person.
Right. It's a verb here. So there is a sense of this, real, perceived, I'm not sure, but I do know that there are institutions that buy up property that before they bought it, it was taxable property. And once they get it, it's not taxable property. What thoughts do you have in terms of ensuring before that happens, before that purchase goes through, and I don't know if it's city-owned, you know, it could sometimes be city-owned land or privately owned land, but are you thinking about using that particular, that as an opportunity to kind of get some of the, what is owed in terms of the pilot? So if we know there's institution X that is getting ready to purchase, you know, X number of square feet on a big, you know, city block, are we using that as an opportunity for leverage before that land goes into their hands and becomes tax exempt, to try to get them to kind of fulfill their obligations, particularly, as Councilor Edwards already pointed out, if there's a variance required to do the work that they may want to do?
No, legally, we cannot do that. Are you implying that we would raise the assessment because they're buying it?
I'm implying
I'm
that
not clear.
you could have, and I'm not implying, I'm simply stating that you could have a conversation to encourage them to get up to date with whatever pilot payments may be owed to the city prior to the deal. It's a conversation, it's encouragement, as everyone has said several times. This is a voluntary program under state law, so I guess rather than just kind of oops, another piece of land has lost, been lost to the city, is there any conversation that happens to say, hey, we understand you're looking at this. We understand that you may be behind. I'm just wondering if that's part of your thought process.
Well, I think as Sam said before, not all the land that they buy is necessarily becomes exempt. If it's not used in furtherance of their mission, it does become taxable. So some examples are the Catholic Church, which closed churches and then left them vacant. Those are being taxed by the city right now because that is not in furtherance of their mission. Or some of the other organizations who will, let's say, land bank, that they buy empty pieces of land, empty lots of land, and they just let them sit, but they're not in furtherance of their mission, then those would be taxable by the city.
Can I jump in as well? So they're taxed until they're developed. When they go for their occupancy permit, which would distinguish that as an institutional or an educational use, then it becomes tax exempt. So if they buy a taxable property, they pay taxes until they actually build the facility and then occupy it and I guess apply for the designation as an educational mission use.
So that clarification is helpful. I know that there's at least one institution in my district that people may say does a lot of institutional creeping and are buying up private property, and then, it's now
Well, there was an
it's now
institution in my
tax
neighborhood
exempt.
that did that to the tune of 300 acres, so
Yeah.
that's more than creep.
Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony. I think it's been very important information, and we're going to move on to the next panel. You're welcome to stay if you like, or go on to do your duties. Second panel, Johnny McGinnis, Ruby Reyes, Cortina Vaughn, and Enid Eckstein. I'm going to take a quick recess. I'd like to turn it over to you for your opening remarks. Thank you for coming, too.
Introduce this panel. I'm going to give it a little bit of an opening statement. My name is Enid Eckstein. I want to thank Councilor Siomo, Edwards, Usabi George, and the other councilors who are here this afternoon for holding and engaging in what is really an important conversation about revenue in our city and the role of nonprofit institutions. I'm a Boston resident for many years, and I'm part of a group called the Pilot Action Group, which is a coalition of community organizations, faith-based, labor, public health, education, advocacy, et cetera. And we came together to advocate for improvements in the program, and we authored a report, which I think all the councilors got, called Boston's Payment in Lieu of Taxes, a fair deal for Boston residents, because we felt it was important to evaluate the program. Yes, our economy is totally an eds and meds economy. It plays a vital role. We're not disputing that. Creates thousands of jobs, world-class institutions, brings in students and patients from around the world. At the same time, it creates challenges for us since these institutions do not pay property taxes. And as said before, 70% of our revenue comes from property taxes. These institutions benefit from being part of the vital fabric of Boston, and they receive essential city services. So what is their responsibility to the city? That's what the pilot program is about, and that's sought to answer the question in 2010 under the task force. Institutions are asked to pay the equivalent of 25% of their assessed value, as we've discussed, of their assessed property taxes, and half of that is forgiven in a community benefit. So in effect, institutions are asked really to pay 12.5% of their assessed, the equivalent of property tax payment. We talked before, as you heard, that the pilot program is a nationally recognized program, but we believe, and our report indicates, that it falls short in several key areas. I don't want to get into all the areas, so I'm going to just summarize, so hopefully you can ask us questions. One is uneven institutional participation. While more total cash funds are collected each year, it is interesting to note that increasingly fewer institutions pay their full requested amount. Each year, that number has actually gone down. In fiscal 2018, on the most recent numbers from released by the city, only 26% of institutions met their full requested pilot payment. Cash payments to the city, Boston's institutions as a whole, over the years of the pilot program have unpaid payments of $77 million, a considerable sum of money, including $17 million for this year alone. The percent collected has decreased each year from a high of 90% in the first year to 65% in fiscal 2018. You've heard before that some sectors are better than others. The healthcare sector comes closest to meeting its obligations, whereas universities and cultural institutions lag behind. But I want to make very clear that several of these institutions have not only paid their fair share, but these institutions hold billions in endowments, have millions in surplus revenue, and paid more this year in hedge fund management fees, than they pay to the city in pilots. So we really have a misalignment here in terms of our system. And this is all public record. This is not bashing an institution. We have an obligation as the city to look at how we oversee a program that we rely on. Property valuation. There have been a lot of good discussion before about this, and I'm a Boston taxpayer. My property gets valued on a regular basis, and I think anybody here who owns a home or pays rent in the city has seen the impact of that, because what this has meant is that our homes increase in value. Even though our tax rate may have gone down, we are paying increasingly more and more, and that 70% which we talk about as revenue has increased each year. It is not sustainable to ask Boston taxpayers to continue to increasingly share the burden as their property values increase. So this is the issue of valuation of this property is really a critical issue. When the program was established in 2010, it is my understanding is that there should be a reevaluation down the road, like in 5 years. Yet we are now into the 7th year and there hasn't been a revaluation. So this is really a critical issue, and I'm really glad that you all asked that in the earlier panel. Community benefit and oversight. This is an issue that is very dear to my heart. I was part of authoring a report on the state of hospital community benefits, which I'd like to say helped lay the basis for the Attorney General, which is voluntary guidelines, to review the hospital community benefit guidelines and to look at how do we do the most strategic investment that actually moves towards investing in the social determinants of health, investing in issues such as education, employment, violence prevention, housing, all of which are really critical issues to our city. The Attorney General guidelines, voluntary, now have a framework for doing that. The Department of Public Health, when they look at a determination of need, uses those same guidelines. Those guidelines also call for community engagement, a very clear community engagement process. The community benefit reporting and transparency, well, there are many great programs that the hospitals and the universities may do. I'm not here to say which program is better or not, but I do believe that there are critical issues here. One is the lack of transparency. We did not see reports on the community benefits until this year. For the last several years, there were no reports. Now there are reports. It's been indicated that several key institutions have yet to file reports. But as a taxpayer and a member and a resident of the city, I believe that we all should have the right to know what these institutions are doing in exchange for the community benefit offset. Also, as other people will testify, and I appreciate your comments of Councilor Janey in terms of community engagement, the hospitals are required to do community engagement as part of the Attorney General and Department of Public Health process. They do it. They have a community health needs assessment that looks at the census tract information and all the data. This is a model that could actually be used across the city, and we need to look at how do communities that are most impacted by the institutional creep or by whatever else is going on in their community actually have a say on what those institutions are doing. A university may say, we're giving scholarships. That may be a good choice, but I believe it's not the institution's choice. It should be a community engagement process, since this is an offset on community benefit. Community benefit means community. Community benefit, as I just heard from the city, has been a situation where the institutions tell the city what they're doing. We have a department, we have a great Boston Public Health Commission that is not necessarily engaged in that process. So we have a lot of things that we'd like to fix about the pilot program. Our report has many recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I just want to give you the categories: maximizing payments, property valuation, development of a common strategic framework that the city evaluates community benefit payments on. We believe that there should be a new pilot commission created that looks at these issues. The world has changed since 2010. The Affordable Care Act challenged hospitals and looked at this whole issue of social determinants of health. The social determinants of health are what are the issues in our city: housing, education, employment, violence, food scarcity. These are all the issues that we need to be challenging ourselves on community benefits. So we want to thank the City Council for engaging and holding this hearing and beginning the process. We want to use this as an opportunity to make the pilot a true national model with high level of participation for all institutions. We believe that there needs to be a strategic approach to community benefit allocation and investment, that there should be a community engagement process that enables impacted communities to have a seat at the table to determine how these institutions allocate community benefit investment. And we are really pleased to be here, and we look forward to working with the council to ensure that this program is really a truly national model in the years to come. And I'm going to introduce Johnny McNinnis now from the Teachers Union.
Good afternoon, councilors. My name is Johnny McInnes, Political Director for the Boston Teachers Union, and we'd like to thank Councilor Siamo for chairing this hearing, and we also like to say thank you to Councilor Edwards and Asabi George for their leadership in calling for and advocating for this issue. The BTU is proud to be a part of the Pilot Action Group Coalition and stands by its recommendations of full payment of pilot, added oversight, a process for transparency and engagement in community benefits, as well as a revelation of nonprofits' property value. As educators, we are increasingly alarmed that the pilot institutions fail to pay their full compromise contributions while the schools struggle with chronic underfunding. We hope to work with the City Council and other stakeholders to make sure Boston's pilot program serves our city, including our schools. This year, we applauded the mayor's initiative with an additional allocation of $2.4 million. We are advocating that this money be used for direct service to our highest need students by hiring 8 school nurses, 7 school psychologists, and 4 social workers. Unfortunately, we are still so far from the recommended standard of a nurse in every school and from meeting nationally recommended ratios for social workers and school psychologists. The school funding crisis is exacerbated by inaction at the state level. In just this concluded legislation session, lawmakers failed to update the school funding formula, which is long overdue, 25 years. This creates added urgency for the city to step in to support our schools. Imagine what inequity gaps we could close if our wealthiest nonprofit neighbors paid their fair share. For example, Just Northeastern University's 2018 unpaid cash pilot contribution could have doubled the mayor's investment in social emotional health in our schools. Between just what the biggest 4 universities in our city, BU, BC, Harvard, and Northeastern, left on the table. The mayor's investment could have been 5 times larger. Last year, our big 4 universities posted an operational surplus of over $330 million. Notably, each one spent more on hedge fund managers' fees than that in the comparatively little that was requested in pilot payments. In a time of decreasing federal and state aid to our schools and city services, the city must act to make sure all are paying their fair share. Aside from full payment, there are other ways institutions can contribute, and that this is through targeted community benefits. One such partnership, you may be familiar with, Councilor Siamo, exists through Harvard and the Gardner K-8 school in Austin, Brighton. This partnership exists because of Harvard's institutional master plan process, and the community benefits residents and the city were able to negotiate through this process. With the support of grants funded in part by Harvard, the Gardner School has been recognized nationally and internationally for its full-service wraparound model called Hub Community Schools, which brings dozens of partners into the school before, during, and after school for students and families. This proves that collaboration works when it comes in conversation with the community. We believe, however, that institutions could partner with our schools beyond the IMP process through a stronger community benefits process and pilot that takes into account the social detriments of health and education and engages deeply with community. In closing, we ask respectfully that our wealthiest institutions grow with us, not on us. We must take bold steps to close the ever-widening opportunity and inequality gaps in our city. They won't close themselves without the collaboration of all Boston stakeholders, including our wealthiest nonprofit neighbors. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Good afternoon.
Aye.
Let's see. Good afternoon, Boston City Councilors, Chair Siamo, Councilor Sabi George, and Councilor Edwards. My name is Cortina Van, and I am a staff member with Mass Affordable Housing Alliance, MAHA, and a concerned homeowner in the community. I want to thank the Boston City Councilors and those, Councilor Janey, thank you, to thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon on the importance of the pilot program in the City of Boston. MAHA is a member-based organization dedicated to increasing both public and private investment to increase that investment in sustainable, affordable homeownership. And we have a strong focus on breaking down the barriers to low and moderate income individuals, home buyers, and homeowners, and we want to eliminate the racial homeownership gap. Our wealthy Boston nonprofit institutions utilize essential city services and need to pay their fair share of payment in lieu of taxes to the City of Boston. These academic institutions, with thousands of students in our neighborhoods, must realize their role in the housing affordability crisis and resulting in greater social economic disparities in our city. We have met a number of people who have come through our doors and have received a high volume of heartbreaking phone calls from people who are struggling to find an affordable home to buy or an affordable apartment to rent in the City of Boston. We're about our working class. What about our working class families? These families are the heart of our city. We have to do a better job in supporting our neighbors. The pilot program can be a viable resource to help our families. In order for that to happen, we need to make the necessary changes to the pilot process to be more transparent, efficient, fair, and working with the community to assess and meet the needs equitably. We need to expand the pie, expand the resources to create more affordable opportunities for renters and home buyers, and pilot can be part of that solution if our institutions pay their share. MAHA, as a member of the Pilot Action Group, PAC, support the following recommendations to improve the City of Boston's pilot program. One, the creation of new pilot oversight commission with representation from community members to ensure services these organizations offer benefit the residents of the city and meet a clearly defined need and mutual determined by the city. The need to, number two, hold nonprofit institutions accountable to pay their full contributions. Three, the revaluation of property values of pilot institutions as prescribed by the city's own pilot guidelines. My home pays the taxes on assessed generated by the city of Boston in fiscal year 2018. There's no reason why the pilot should be based on assessments from fiscal year 2009, as they had talked about the guidelines of the task force guidelines for 2011, which equates to the fiscal year 2009. Number four, transparency and community benefits reporting, documenting clearly how these organizations are providing needed services to city residents. And I thank Councilor Janey in highlighting that process of actual benefits for city residents and residents being involved in that process. Number five, creating a community engagement process aligned with social detriments of health and education. I thank you very much for this opportunity. We look forward to working with the Boston City Councilors and Mayor Marty Walsh to make these necessary improvements. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nia Evans, and I'm the director of Boston Ujima Project, a multi-stakeholder initiative that deploys the political, social, and financial capital of Boston's working-class residents of color to invest in and advocate for people of color and cooperatively owned businesses and other initiatives in Boston that improve community health, build community wealth, and reduce the racial wealth gap. It is an honor to testify today on behalf of the Boston Ujima Project and also on behalf of Aaron Tanaka of Center for Economic Democracy, who is unable to join us in person today, but cares deeply about a pilot program that has the potential to truly positively impact Boston's diverse communities. As a co-founding member of the Pilot Action Group, we want to recognize that today's hearing represents months of hard work by our colleagues and members. We also thank Councilor Edwards and Asabi George for calling this hearing, as well as Councilor Janey, Councilor Siomo, and other members of the Council administration for your active engagement with this critical issue. In a time where federal politics are failing us and Boston's racial disparities feel intractable, we're happy to add our voice to this public testimony to uplift the need and opportunity to reform the City of Boston's pilot program. As the director of the Boston Ujima Project, representing hundreds of members across the city, we strongly support the recommendations outlined in the pilot report by Eckstein and Rodriguez. Today, we highlight the call to create a community engagement process to oversee and guide the pilot program. As a response to our city's notorious racial health and wealth divide, Ujima is working to create a multi-million-dollar capital fund to invest into Boston's working-class communities of color. This fund will be democratically governed and directed by our members and the residents of our communities. We are building a participatory process, not just because we believe that democracy is a human right, but also because we believe that meaningful community-based planning will result in a better, more effective allocation of resources. As you know, half of pilot contributions can be made through in-kind, non-cash donations. In the last 4 years, these donations have totaled over $200 million. Currently, there is no space for Boston residents to meaningfully understand or influence these donations that are made on our behalf. Imagine a pilot program guided by a pilot commission comprised of leaders from our communities who are most left out. Consider participatory processes where residents and stakeholders can engage with our major institutions to identify and design more strategic and impactful pilot contributions. With over $77 million in unpaid pilot cash payments and the lack of community oversight and engagement, it is clear that Boston's nationally recognized pilot program is in need of real reform. We see this moment as an opportunity for our largest institutions to embrace the city that houses them and to advance equity and justice for all Boston communities. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your testimony. Councilor Asabi George.
I just want to first thank you for being here and testifying, but also for your work on this report, because I've started to go through it when you emailed it to me, but here in person, and it just is, I think, very thorough for sure. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about some of the other pilot programs, maybe across the country, that I know you did some looking at, and if you could maybe identify what an ideal process for community engagement and the pilot process looks like maybe in other places.
Okay, that's a lot of questions.
Sorry.
Well, first of all, I think what's important and was kind of missed in the first testimony was that Boston is especially unique because unlike some of the other cities that have high levels of nonprofit institutions, educational and healthcare, they have other sources of taxation. They might have an income tax, they might have an earned income tax credit, or some other source of revenue. So we are particularly challenged because of the fact that we don't have other sources of revenue. And I actually looked up the number. The state budget provides only some $291,000 as reimbursement to Boston on state-owned land in fiscal 2018. So that's the amount, that's the dollar that's coming back. And that's in actually, that number actually comes from the City of Boston budget. So I just thought, as we were sitting here, I
We
looked that
actually
up.
give them
And then
80
we pay them
million.
back.
We pay them 80 million for the tea.
So anyway, so ideally, I mean, I feel like that's really an interesting question. You know, I think other cities are experimenting with different programs. So when the Boston pilot program was established, I'd like to think that it really was a good model. And I think if all the institutions paid their fair share, you know, we could argue more, but that's what was determined to be the dollar amount, the percentage of potential city services. And we had a way of true community engagement. The dollar amount of money forgiven by the city on community benefits over the last 7 years is $270-some million. I can't even imagine if we had $270 million directed in a common strategic direction, the things the city might have been able to do. So I feel like the community engagement piece is really critical. You know, other cities have tried different things. They all, you know, it's not like I can say, you know, some cities have sued their nonprofit institutions and actually have created payment programs to pay for particular projects. What was unique about Boston is that it was an ongoing program. So I think that it's not like there's a better model. I would say that we have a good start here, but we really need to think about how to tighten it up and be much more strategic about it. And I'd like to, you know, see that like the hospital community was confronted with the same set of issues on community benefits, and the Attorney General and the Department of Public Health really looked at how do we take community benefit investment and seek to be more strategic, to look at upstream issues that really impact health. And I think that that's a good model, and we don't really have a good framework in the city. I would say in our report, we say that's a framework that we should be looking at. It may not be perfect, but you can't tell me that the community of Mission Hill, where the Brigham Hospital has done a community health needs assessment, has a different set of health care, social determinants, educational needs than the Northeastern community, because it's the same census tract, it's the same community. So we have some pieces in place that we should actually be looking at how we can implement and actually then, you know, really look at the community engagement process in that.
Thank you. I'll save my rest for the next
Okay.
round.
Thank you. Councilor Edwards.
Very briefly, can you talk a little bit about your organizing this action group? Were any of the large institutions invited to be a part of it?
You mean where the hospitals
Or the universities?
No.
What has been your communication with them, if any?
Well, I think that there's been some indirect communication in terms of some of the hospitals, and they knew this was going on, and I think some of the universities. We have not sat down and had a formal conversation. Our goal was to bring community, faith-based, labor, public health groups together to talk about what's working and what's not working.
Mm-hmm.
We would love to have an engagement process, but we believe that part of it is that it's the city who could help bring us together. We also feel that, there are organizations that are directly confronting their institutions, and some of them will speak after, in terms of trying to seek justice from the institutions that they may be employed by or may have an ongoing relationship with. I don't know if other people want to answer that.
And just, so if I walk away from this moment, from the action group, and your immediate ask, assuming again that the city is going to continue to say it's voluntary in terms of enforcement, but some immediate actions that you think the city can do right now, what would that list be? I mean, I understand it's assessing annually. I understand it's actually creating a community benefits committee or commission. Is there anything else that, I mean, because this is not, that has nothing to do with the voluntary part. It's about being strategic and planning. So if you could.
Well, I certainly think that, highlighting those institutions that pay, and as I think you suggested, the idea of looking at when hospitals or universities or institutions come forward and they want to expand, asking, have you paid your pilot? How do we do greater scrutiny before we automatically engage? I understand quite well these are nonprofit institutions and the voluntary nature, but I also believe there's a role in terms of leadership and assertiveness about trying to get these institutions to pay their fair share.
My last question is, I know in the report you had mentioned that beyond the enforcement and the stick component, but highlighting or doing something positive for those institutions that are paying, even if it is at the 2011 numbers. What ideas would you have for that, to tell a university good job or something?
Well, this is just off the top of my head. I mean, maybe there's a way that the mayor honors those institutions publicly. You have to understand the pilot website, go through who paid, who didn't pay, whose community benefits, not whose community benefits. That's not what people normally do in their day-to-day life. So I believe there's a way that we could highlight what the institutions are doing, give credit to those that are good partners, as you said, good neighbor policy, those that are good neighbors, those that are not good neighbors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Janey.
Yes, thank you. First, I just want to thank you for this report, your thoughtful testimony here this afternoon, but also this report. I can't imagine the work that went into this report. It is very thorough. I really appreciate that you have clear recommendations. It's not just here are all the problems. One of the recommendations is this idea of a pilot commission. Can you talk about what the charge of the commission would be?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure that my co-author gets credit also.
Yes, please.
So Jonathan Rodriguez, who was part of the BTU.
It's a great
Right. So, so the question you asked is, what would a new pilot commission? And I wish other people would ask. I don't want to be the only person on the hot seat here. But I would say part of the charge should be to create a process that ensures higher level of accountability, greater scrutiny of pilot payments, establishing a strategic framework for community benefit investment. It was surprising to me to hear the city to say here that the institutions tell us.
Right.
I believe that the city should inform and create a framework for institutions to do that.
Enid, I don't want to interrupt you, but I tried to clarify what I think is more accurate.
Okay.
Every university and medical institution has to provide the city with a 10-year master plan after the previous one expires. There's a community task force comprised of community members, as many as 12 to 15 folks. The process is public. It's a lengthy process. Community benefits are negotiated with the task force, with the community in the room. a dialogue back and forth over many months, and I've participated in several of these community master plans. So to say they tell us what they want is, I think, not accurate.
So can I
She didn't say
clarify
that.
something?
The CFO said that.
Just wanted to also be involved in this, and I think I want to make sure that we're talking about two different things, I think. There's the
Right.
master plan, which is very clear that the city has given us an example of how we can engage, move, and include the community in true benefit definition. And I think that's an example that we actually say, great, this is what the city shows what it can do and should do, especially when dealing with nonprofit organizations. And I think it was incredibly helpful for you to point that out for us. But I want to be sure that to note that there are times where the telling of us on these annual reports that there is different from the master plan, the annual reports, right? And I think that's what we're talking about. So one of the examples in the annual report is that a private high school reported that the money saved to BPS by students not going to BPS was a community benefit. Okay, so those are the things, right? Or the other one where they have student volunteers who may have volunteered even without the pilot program existing, saying their volunteer hours in the community based off of maybe a community, a requirement from class was all of a sudden a benefit. So I think it's that kind of discretion that we need to be scrutinized that are beyond the master plan community benefits and process, which again is a wonderful example of how it can be done.
Yeah. I thank you, because that's what I was going to say, that there's two different processes here. One is the institutional master plan. And when I know Harvard did its expansion in Alston Brighton, there was a lot of discussion with the community, and the community pushed back quite a bit to get additional funds. And Harvard was, I assume, fairly responsive in terms of being
Well, not to everybody's liking,
Right.
but certainly.
But on the pilot community benefit, it's a different process, and that's all I was trying to clarify.
Okay.
And I agree. I would say that there is room for improvement, certainly room for much more community input and engagement. I'm certainly glad to see the engagement here in the chamber today. And so thank you again for that. So you highlighted three things in terms of the charge: higher level of accountability, greater scrutiny, and the development of a framework.
Right. And I was going to add one other thing.
Yes.
But we got into the discussion of institutional master plans. I believe representative of our communities.
Yes.
That is really critical for us.
So talk about that. Talk about the makeup, how many members and who determines who's on the commission, and what the members look like in terms of, neighborhood geography or whatever. So I don't want to put you on the spot. Exactly. I don't want to put you on the spot.
We can make one up.
If you still have some thinking to do in that area, that's fine. If you have some initial thoughts, I'm certainly happy to hear those.
Well, there's one thing I can share. I think one of the initiatives that I was blessed to have experience with, or at least participating with years ago, was the Lead Action Collaborative, and it consisted of people in the community along with elected officials, and Department of Health, folks in the City of Boston's Health Department, and the charge was helping to eliminate lead paint poisoning for children. And it was essentially where people were from different parts of the city. It could be volunteer basis, but I don't think, we haven't come out with a defined model as of yet, and it would be nice to look at some similar models that have been successful, and part of that program was making sure there was funding in our state to help people de-lead their homes, and maybe we can look at different models, but I think today we don't have an official, defined model, but definitely are working towards that.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I certainly didn't mean to put you on the spot. Did you want to add anything there?
Sure. I'm being volunteered or voluntold. I think that's the term. As I stated, UGMA's mission is to engage in participatory processes within our own organization, and so we've definitely have been working over the last few years to refine that process. And so while this action group does not have a defined model per se, we would definitely look to some of the processes that we have been experimenting with and working to refine, to use that as an example. So for example, when we think about who would be on the commission, we would think about what geographical representation looks like. We would think about what income representation looks like on the commission. As I stated earlier, our initiative is a multi-stakeholder initiative. And this makes me think about your question, Councilor Edwards, about conversations that we've had with institutions to date. We would think about what institutional representation would look like on the commissions, so that there truly is a conversation
Between the institutions as well
all
as the community.
actors, yep, that are participating.
And then another question. Yes.
In 2010 pilot commission, it was a fairly top-down. It was representatives. It was chaired by an attorney who, facilitated the process. And it did do hearings around the city, which I thought was useful to look at. But it included fairly high level and not that many community organizations, although it did take testimony. I think that the model that hospitals are moving to of looking at their community engagement process that does have people who are representative of the communities impacted and their patient census is a good model to start to look at.
I appreciate that. In terms of the community engagement process, are there also models that you would share? Obviously, different organizations may have their own model. Perhaps you want more time to think about what that looks like. But if you have any initial thoughts, I'm certainly interested.
Well, the only thing I would put into this equation, but I feel that, this is just, a starting process on what this looks like, is that under the Massachusetts Hospital Attorney General guidelines and the Department of Public Health, there is a model of community engagement. I feel it's a little too early to evaluate how effective it is because it's just going into, it's just being implemented. But it does have a fairly extensive way of looking at community engagement. So I feel like that would be something that a new pilot commission could look at. To me, the advantage of that would be that you then have alignment. You have something that is already familiar to one half of the, to a high percentage of institutions, as well as we don't want to have 20 different processes. The goal here is to have a regulatory framework that makes sense to people.
Thank you. And again, thank you for your presentation this afternoon. Thank you for all of the work that you do in your respective organizations, and certainly thank you for this report and your advocacy. Deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Savi-George?
Thank you. I just have one quick follow-up question. Earlier, Councilor Janey was asking about the jobs in the city of Boston created by all of these institutions. Do you have any idea on the number of Boston residents that have those jobs?
No, I don't offhand.
I think that information, personally, I think that information is critical to know that with the universities. My dad worked at BU as a security guard, and I got to go to BU for free. And that was a tremendous, certainly personal benefit, but family benefit. And we should know that information. We should be encouraging our universities to hire locally for all jobs, but not necessarily just those security jobs, for some of the higher paying jobs along the way. So, I'm grateful for that, and I think that can have a tremendous impact, like it did for my family, on so many families across the city of Boston in all of these categories. But you think about future economic, personal economic opportunity that you give kids that can attend the finest universities in the world.
Agreed.
Thank you. That was it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony today, and we'll excuse you now for our third and final panel. Thank you. We have Marilyn Schwartz-Lloyd, Rob McCarron, Jason Ruggiero, and Jim Clockey. I'm going to take a quick recess again.
I do have to go to the restroom. From Massport.
Welcome our guests for the third panel, and I'll just turn it over to you in whatever order you choose.
Sure. Good afternoon, councilors. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Jim Clockey. I'm the head of the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network. MNN is a statewide association representing all types of nonprofits in Massachusetts. We have over 800 members statewide. Several hundred of those members are in the city of Boston, all types of nonprofits, working in partnership, most of them with city and state government to deliver critical services. We talk to colleagues around the country who also represent nonprofits and who work on these issues. And it's our clear sense that the Boston pilot program is unique. I think it's the strongest in the country. It gets a lot of attention from people around the country, and it has made a name for itself. So I just offer that as context. There's a lot of good work done by the task force, which has withstood the test of time and which other people around the country are now looking to emulate. One of the things that I just wanted to mention in the Boston program, the way it was set up, has a lot of good features. There is, however, one way in which it tends to hide or not fully reflect some of what's going on. What the formula says is that your requested contribution is 12.5% of your property tax liability in cash, and up to 12.5% in community benefits. There are a number of organizations that actually provide community benefits at a level far greater than that 12.5%. What shows up in a spreadsheet is the 12.5%, and so in some cases there is actually even more activity going on than you might think just by looking at a single number. Having said that, we know it was crafted with a lot of meetings, a lot of input. We know these are always discussions that are partnership discussions between organizations, between communities, between leaders in government. And so we appreciate the spirit of partnership that you bring to this and that set up the program in the first place. I wanted to provide one other just contextual piece of information. We were planning to mention that federal tax bill coming in here today. That tax bill had a lot of bad things in it. That tax bill made it much harder to operate a nonprofit, frankly, whether you're large, small, or medium-sized. There are a lot of things in it that impose new burdens on nonprofits. The provision about the endowment tax was written right into the law. The IRS is now implementing that, but that was something that some Republicans in Congress decided to write into the law. But in addition, one of the other things they did, they took away the charitable tax deduction for charitable contributions for the vast majority of middle-income taxpayers in the United States. The result of that is that in 2018, for the first time, the cost of charitable giving will go up by 28% for nearly all middle-income donors all over the country. We know from our members, individual donations are really important to them. They rely on those funds as much as anything else. And so in that federal tax bill, they just upped the cost of giving for middle-income people by 28%. If it was up to us, everybody would get a 28% tax deduction for charitable giving. It was taken away from middle-income donors, and one of the other ways in which that federal tax bill is creating new problems for nonprofits. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Look forward to working with you on these and any other issues the council is looking at as it relates to nonprofits.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Siomo and committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you some thoughts about the important role that the private nonprofit colleges and universities play in making Boston such a vibrant place to live, learn, and work. My name is Rob McCarron. I serve as Senior Vice President and General Counsel for the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities in Massachusetts, also known as AICUM. We represent the public policy interests of 57 private nonprofit colleges and universities throughout the Commonwealth. 18 private colleges and universities are proud to call Boston home. They are equally proud to leverage their unique missions and strengths to contribute in so many ways to the educational, cultural, and innovation fabric of the city. In Boston, these 18 colleges and universities educate over 2,500 Boston residents, provide more than $58 million in financial aid to those students from Boston, employ well over 10,000 Boston residents, spend an incredible $1.7 billion in the city for local goods and services, pay tens of millions of dollars in real estate taxes and other taxes, and in collaboration with their affiliated teaching hospitals, as you've heard already today, attract nearly $2 billion in federal research dollars to the city. The colleges and universities in Boston also anchor our regional economy and serve as magnets for attracting students, researchers, and faculty who then contribute their individual and collective talents to Boston. At the outset, it is important to recognize the tax-exempt status provided to nonprofit colleges and universities as charitable organizations by both the state and federal government is a precedent grounded in 200 years of history and supported in all 50 states. This deliberate and established policy distinguishes the role that nonprofits play in providing an incredible array of mission-based programs and partnerships that are core to their charitable mission. It inherently recognizes the fact that the government should not and indeed cannot be solely responsible for bearing the cost of delivering such services. In the context of higher education, colleges and universities provide educational services, cutting-edge research, healthcare, scholarships, cultural and athletic opportunities, legal services, a commitment to sustainability, and tens of thousands of hours of student and staff volunteer time. Institutions also foster important public policy issues and partner with the city and other nonprofit organizations in meaningful and impactful ways. In short, it would be virtually impossible for the city to replicate the depth and breadth of such services and the level of civic engagement that already exists. When we talk about or discuss the city's pilot program, I think it's equally important to acknowledge several key factors about it, or facts. The pilot program, as you've heard, is voluntary. And in December 2010, Mayor Menino's pilot task force, after nearly 18 months of work and hearings, released its final report and recommendations. The task force determined that, above all else, the pilot program should remain voluntary. The task force found that the voluntary nature of the program fosters a spirit of collaboration between the city and nonprofit organizations. This environment allows partnerships to evolve organically and in ways that better leverage the unique missions and strengths of each nonprofit organization, including colleges and universities. The second point, and as you've heard several folks say already today, the Boston Pilot Program is considered to be one of the most successful programs in the country. The pilot program generates considerable revenue and benefits to the city, about $78 million in FY18. It is the voluntary nature of the program, however, that provides the flexibility for colleges and universities to be national leaders in partnering with the city to make impactful contributions to Boston's residents. Whether it's BU's multitude of scholarship programs or educational outreach program with BPS, Harvard's Family Van, Arnold Arboretum, or Crimson Summer Academy, Emerson College's ambitious redevelopment of a previously blighted combat zone, and its recent revitalization of Roch Field, Boston College's Alston-Brighton Scholarship Program, City Connects Program, the Alston-Brighton Community Fund, and Neighborhood Improvement Fund, the comprehensive dental services provided by Tufts University to BPS students, Northeastern University's investment of $26 million to renovate Carter Playground, and its commitment to spend more than $80 million over the next 30 years to maintain it, and Simmons College's $13 million redevelopment of Daly Field, which it operates in collaboration with schools and community groups in Alston-Brighton. And that $13 million figure does not include the $225,000 they need to spend each year to maintain the field. And that is just some of the contributions from fewer than half of the institutions that I talked about at the beginning. Another point that I think it's important to remember when talking about the pilot program, and I think you've heard a little bit about it earlier today, is that the footprint of Boston's colleges and universities is small and has remained stable over time. Less than 4% of tax-exempt property in the city of Boston is owned by colleges and universities. The vast majority of tax-exempt property, more than 78%, is owned by the city, state, or federal government. In fact, data from the Boston Municipal Research Bureau shows that the percentage of property owned by the eds and meds has remained consistent for more than a decade. Unfortunately, the misperception that the colleges and universities own 50% of Boston's land runs contrary to the facts and data. Colleges and universities play an essential role in Boston's vibrant economy. They function as anchors, support the city's impressive bond rating, and attract talented students, researchers, and faculty, as well as a growing list of companies from across the nation and around the world. GE, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, Red Hat, and Amazon are just a few that have decided that they need to be here in Boston to be close to the innovation happening on our campuses. Just yesterday, Boeing announced that it's moving its technology subdivision to be closer to the talent and innovation that defines the Boston area. As recently as May 2018, both Moody's Investor Services and S&P Global credited Boston's economic diversity bolstered by a substantial tax-exempt institutional presence and a talented workforce. These findings were echoed by a similar report produced by Moody's in 2014. Finally, any discussion regarding the city's pilot program should be viewed in the context of an incredibly challenging environment for all colleges and universities that they navigate on a daily basis. This is truly an unprecedented time for the entire higher education sector. Demographic projections show that the number of college-age students in the Northeast will continue to decline for at least the next decade. And uncertainty abounds in Washington, D.C. with regard to research and financial aid funding, as well as the impact of federal tax reform. And as Jim mentioned, the endowment tax that was part of President Trump's tax plan essentially targeted big institutions in blue states. And what it means for Massachusetts is over the next 10 years, tens of millions of dollars will leave the state, tens of millions of dollars that could have been spent here on financial aid, on construction jobs, on research, that's leaving the state to go to Washington, D.C. as part of that proposal. Fundamentally, a college's or university's tax-exempt status guarantees that its resources are dedicated to its charitable mission. Tuitions and research grants alone do not cover the full cost of educating students or conducting research. It's private donations and earnings from the institution's investments that cover the difference. Institutions are responding to an already fiscally challenging environment while also standing by their commitment to partner with the city to make Boston a vibrant place to live. Requiring institutions to make mandatory or enhanced pilot payments would force them to make significant and possibly mission-altering cuts to financial aid and jobs, the two largest expense categories for most colleges. It could also limit the resources that they are able to use in furtherance of the innumerable community benefits programs and partnerships that exist throughout the city. In fact, this was one of the unintended consequences that the pilot task force expressed concern about in its 2010 report. The story of Boston and higher education is not about lost revenue. It's about the ways that colleges and universities are fulfilling their charitable mission to educate students, drive research and innovation and cures, and support communities according to the institution's unique strengths, and as a result, helping make Boston the vibrant city that it is today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, councilors and Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the contributions of the Longwood community to the health and education of the city of Boston. My name is Marilyn Swartz-Lloyd, and I'm president of MASCO. I am also a Boston resident, and I used to be head of economic development for the city of Boston under Raymond Flynn, and so I am always acutely aware of the importance of working and finding jobs in the city of Boston. And I know that was one of the questions about the institutions. If you go to masco.org, you'll find that there is a section called How to Find a Job in the LMA, and it lists the HR departments of all of the 23 institutions that are in the Longwood medical and academic area. And we're always looking for folks to work there. There was also a question on how many people in Boston work in the institutions. I can only tell you about Longwood. We represent just that area. There are 55,000 people that work there, and fully 1/3 of them are Boston residents. It hasn't been sliced and diced in terms of the types of jobs, but I can tell you that every type of job is represented just from the folks that I know. MASCO itself stands for the Medical, Academic, and Scientific Community Organization. It was chartered in 1972 as a charitable organization by its members in order to enhance the Longwood community and undertake projects that were better done in collaboration than singly. So the institutions are always trying to find a way to be most efficient so that they can save money and continue to serve in the city of Boston. MASCO itself pays 100% of the city's pilot request. And in addition, we undertake community benefits such as snow plowing in winter to get to any of the MBTA stops because it isn't often plowed. And we do landscaping in the summer, among many other types of programs. For our 23 institutions, we offer a wide range of services, including area planning and development, parking and shuttles. We try to decrease congestion in the area, and so we have a shuttle system, about 37 buses that are paid for by the institutions and MASCO. We undertake telecommunications and childcare. In addition to the cash payments that Masco makes to the city, we bring money into the city of Boston by working with the state and the federal government. We raise the money to have a full-service station at Yawkey. We've recently brought in money at Ruggles so that area has more tracks, more trains, people can get in and out of the area, and it will help with the development. We think it's a great idea to work with the state to be able to raise more money, and we've been trying to raise more money for years in order to enhance the Green Line so more people can get to work more easily in the Longwood area. We also work closely with groups advocating for additional funds for the MBTA, particularly the Green Line. And the amount that we put into our own shuttle service is over $7 million so that we can pick up people at JFK, at Ruggles, at Yawkey, and decrease the number of cars that are in the area. For every bus that you see there, it's 40 fewer cars that will be riding up and down the streets. Everybody has talked about the voluntary payments that the institutions make. And in addition, though, to the payments that the institutions are making, they're exceeding the community benefit goals through the contributions of their programs. And the institutions, back in 2010, made agreements with the city on the types of programs. I don't know if that had been mentioned, but the institutions can't just say, here's what we do, and therefore we think that's our 50% contribution. There was agreement on what programs would be admissible, and those programs fit into the strategic plans of the city at that time. The idea of bringing groups together to perhaps redo that strategic plan makes a lot of sense. Where do you want your money going now? Because certainly that was an understanding of the group when it got together back in 2010. So a small sampling of the programs that were admissible and that are being undertaken now in healthcare. And by the way, the Boston Public Health Commission does a survey every year where it asks what are the particular needs that the hospitals should be involved in. So millions of dollars in outreach grants have gone to the Boston's community health centers, which are the first step for healthcare in all of the neighborhoods. I used to be on the DMIC board. We worked very closely with Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital, and those ties have been strengthened over a year as a result of the interest of the communities. Mammography van cancer screenings have gone out from all of the communities for women in underserved neighborhoods. There's been financial support of asthma prevention for low-income and underserved children, and the free dental screenings that you've already heard about. There's also counseling and medical and mental health services for victims of violence and sex abuse. There's been a total of $177 million in state community benefits. This isn't the cash, these are the programs that the hospitals have given. In education, the institutions have dual college high school enrollment programs for students from local high schools. There's financial support for children with school functioning problems and learning delays, $194 million in scholarships. And together, the Masco members support, and this is the thing that I have always been the most interested in just because of my background, but $2.9 million in workforce development and school-based training programs with over 15,000 participants in almost 600 different workforce development programs. The private nonprofit institutions in Boston are deeply involved in health education and care for the Boston residents, both within Longwood and in the neighborhoods through these direct services in Boston's community health centers. Their educational institutions, students, faculty, and staff provide countless services and volunteer hours supporting community organizations that make a difference to Boston residents. And the colleges that are within the Masco area, within the Longwood area, have about 60% that stay in Boston, which is really important because often people coming to the schools are leaving the state, coming here and then going, but the folks who are in the Longwood area have stayed here and continue to work and enhance the city and the neighborhoods. The EDS, the MEDS, and the cultural organizations, as everybody has said, are all economic generators for the Commonwealth. I hope that this is a useful summary. We'd obviously be interested in continuing to work with you as you think through what's the best way to work with the institutions within their mission. And I say within the mission for two reasons. One, the people there have to know what they're doing within their particular area. So that's why the hospitals would continue to work in the neighborhood and health and the colleges in education. So they are critical economic components, are interested in continuing to work with the neighborhoods and want to make meaningful contributions within their particular expertise. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony as well, all three of you. I think it's pretty thorough and thoughtful. Although there are still questions that are unanswered, and I think through the process of today and consecutive hearings, we'll get to it. Can we talk a little bit more about the jobs piece? Do you have information to share about what their proximity to institutions, how close they live, in particular in Boston, of course?
Yes, Council. I don't have data on the proximity. I just know that we just did a quick survey with the schools in Boston, and the ones that were able to respond in a pretty short order. The number was over 10,000 people, residents of Boston, who are employed by the colleges, universities in Boston.
And that's all of them?
Well, that's of the ones who were able to respond within, I think we asked them to turn the information around pretty quickly.
And then, so I think that that's something that we'll continue to ask for and get some, I think, more concrete data. Can you also talk a little bit about institutional creep? As we talked about it earlier, the growth of institutions, again, universities, hospitals, other nonprofit institutions in the city of Boston. Do you have any information to share about the physical growth of property and sort of land use in particular institutions, but then also have their employee numbers grown, have their student number grown, have their number of visits or exhibit space, has that grown? To talk about that, to understand, I think, have a better picture about growth.
Yeah, what's my understanding, a lot of the institutions will be submitting written testimony to you and the rest of the councilors, so I think a lot of that will be included and explained in great detail with that written testimony. I just know in looking at this issue and looking at the data from the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, just looking at the footprint of the colleges, universities, and we hear a lot that it's Boston is half of its land mass is tax exempt, but it is at least the footprint for the colleges and universities has stayed pretty stable and pretty consistent. I think what maybe people might see construction going on campus and think that there's an expansion going on, but the data at least that we saw from the Research Bureau suggests that it's been fairly consistent for an extended period of time.
Well, and some of it may be consistent for the footprint, but there is a lot of vertical growth that happens too, which increases capacity, increases dollars that are, on campus that are spent on developing campuses.
Yeah, I also
So
think and those things also increase, I think, the economic benefits that accrue from the institutions and having the folks that come here to visit these campuses. I mean, one thing I didn't talk about, the campuses are a huge tourist attraction for people that come here, spend money here, stay in the hotels, go to the restaurants.
I certainly don't argue with that, that all of our institutions, again, people come, like you said, to visit the universities, check them out, go to our hospitals for health care, visit our institutions as part of visiting Boston. Do you have some dollar amounts related to, any of you, related to the economic impact that those visits, whether for healthcare institutions or universities, have?
We have looked at some in the past, and I could get those to you. I don't want to try to remember something and get it wrong for you right now, but we do have, I know we've done some, we've collected some data on spending, student spending, and the economic benefit of that. And I think there's been other individual institutions have done economic benefit analysis, and we try to compile that data as best we can, so it's something that we're able to talk about. So I'm happy to take a look and get that information to you.
Right, and then you, I think I forget who it was that mentioned sort of that cap and what we're documenting for the community benefits contribution at 12.5%. Do you have information on what the percentage that goes over that?
We don't have the total. I know for a few institutions, the amount of benefits provided far exceeds the 12.5% for their own institution. And you know, what we're working with right now is the kind of the data as it's reported, the data as it's configured. So as you're looking at those questions going forward, it might be worth factoring in some way.
And what I think is interesting about that data that is reported, those are the community benefits that are accepted based on the 2010 guidelines of what the institutions can report. So each institution is doing considerably more than that particular kind of ball of information.
Thank you, Chair.
Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. I'm sorry, is it Mr. Doherty?
No, I'm Rob McCarron.
I'm sorry.
Mr.
From
Doherty is the
Association of Independent Colleges?
Yes.
Okay. So is it your organization's position that the colleges and universities in Massachusetts are paying their fair share?
I think the colleges and universities contribute in innumerable ways on all levels, and I think they're a great asset for the city and the state. And I think that they contribute in terms of financial aid dollars that are given not only to Boston residents but to residents throughout the state. I think last year the number for financial aid that was given to Massachusetts students, just Massachusetts students, was in excess of $600 million.
So I'm going to agree with everything you just said. Yep. I'm going to ask the question again. Is it your organization's position that they are paying their fair share?
Yes.
Okay. So when you bring up those different benefits, and you brought up a list of them with the jobs and so on and so forth, what is your organization's position then on the universities that have had to have, I don't know, organizing drives to create unions to get fair wages? I've been part of them for graduate students. I've been part of them for some of the cafeteria workers. I'm sure you're aware that with the jobs that you're providing, there's had to been copious amounts of organizing to make sure those workers are paid appropriately. I would love to hear your organization's position on the amount of displacement that's happening in our community. We are in a housing crisis despite the economic boom here in Massachusetts. And so I'm just curious, when your organization is talking about or thinking about all the contributions the universities are making, do they also analyze some of the detriments or the impacts that they have on our community?
I don't know how to analyze the question you're asking about detriments and impacts.
Well, let's just talk about the jobs then.
Yeah.
Do you know the number of institutions that have had organizing campaigns to make sure the workers are?
I do not know. I know there's been organizing efforts, but we are not involved in those efforts. That's an institution by institution relationship.
But this association is taking a collective view on at least the fair share component, right? And you brought up the jobs, so that's why I'm also responding to that. So if you're talking about jobs on the collective, in terms of the quality that those institutions are actually providing, I think that's worth that kind of analysis, especially if we're going to use that or call it a benefit. That's one caution. And then also, when we're talking about the footprint, as my colleague, Councilor Asabi George, brought up, there is a footprint and creep of the students into a lot of our neighborhoods. And does your organization look at that or analyze at all the displacement as a result of actually, in many cases, your institutions on-campus housing being more expensive than even off-campus and market?
We have not done any analysis on displacement, and I know that there's been effort to increased dorm capacity so that they're, to get students out of the neighborhoods and
Which I
onto
fully
the
support.
campus. Yeah.
And the only reason why I bring this up is not to I think as someone had mentioned, to bully or embarrass or to do anything, but if we're going to talk about actual benefits, we talk about them, I think we should talk about them in the holistic view of what they are and what they aren't. Would it be your organization's position at the very minimum that we should know what the actual property values are of the properties that are being assessed for pilot? You know, when you're saying you're giving a benefit, wouldn't you want to know if it's an actual benefit from 2011 numbers or 2018 numbers?
Well, I think that's the role of the city and the assessor's office to make that determination. I mean, I think the pilot program, they use that as part of the equation to look at to see what the how it would be structured. But it, you know, it's and I think it's just they've continued to operate under that part of it.
Well, would you want the city then to have more accurate data so you know the goals and the standards that you're trying to say that you're exceeding? For example, I think someone brought up the fact that you're actually giving more than what is assessed. Well, is that really true if it's based off of 2011 numbers and not 2018? Wouldn't we want a common, accurate, up-to-date standard?
I think they do a good job with their community benefits, and I haven't seen all the reports of trying to explain what those benefits are. And I think a lot of the benefits, those community benefits programs evolve from conversations that happen organically with community groups and folks on the campus. And I think what they try to do is make sure that those benefits are good matches for the individual institution and the strengths of those institutions.
Does your organization engage with community as an organization and who in the community?
Our organization meets with anyone. We've met with folks, whoever asked to meet with us, we've met with.
Okay, so I guess I wanted to, do you do community process or analysis of the impact of colleges and universities? And if you do that, do you do it with community members? How do you assess the success or not of colleges and universities?
How do you assess? I mean, how do you assess the? I'm sorry if I don't know if I
So I
understand
talked
the
about
question.
displacement. I talked about impacts that the college and universities are having in community. That's from me hearing from community saying this is what's happening. Do you hear from community to say what's happening for the colleges and universities in Massachusetts? Do you reach out to them to figure out the impact that you are having on community?
No, we do. Our association represents the colleges and universities, and that's who we're talking to, and what we're getting information from them and through them as they engage, and that's how we get information about what they're doing as far as their community benefits programs.
Yes, and that's, thank you. I mean, you talk to the universities and colleges and so on and so forth, and I think what would be helpful then is if we're going to talk, when you're advocating for them and their interests, to know fully all of the impacts that they're having. So there's a whole bunch of organizations here who I think would love to maybe talk with you and invite you. I can't speak for the action group, but it would be wonderful to see that kind of dialogue happen between the two of you. About what colleges and universities, good and bad, the impact that they're having, and to hear it from their perspective. I would encourage that.
Okay.
And then I just wanted to make sure I understood your numbers correctly. So 55,000 jobs,
That's
one-third are Boston residents?
That's right.
And when, again, you don't have whether they're minimum wage or six-figure salary jobs. You don't.
Correct.
You don't know
That's
exactly
right.
what that. And you had mentioned that there were several benefits that you had mentioned, and to the medical institutions' credit, they have stepped up in many cases to the plate. But is that a result of their nonprofit status being directly linked to, or having actual community benefit requirement in its definition of nonprofits, or is there something else that you guys managed to understand and do that you could educate the educational institutions about?
Well, we do have educational institutions who are also very effective, I think, in reaching out, especially in terms of volunteering in the schools. I think that all of our nonprofit institutions, the very being of nonprofit means that you're mission-driven, and you have a strong desire to do either art and culture or reach out in terms of religion or reach out in terms of healthcare and education. And I mean, I would say that our 6 colleges of the Fenway are exemplary in terms of all working with the schools and mentoring and having special programs, and especially this dual program where you can take college courses, for instance, at the same time that you're taking high school courses. And I can't say whether it's the carrot or the stick, but I think it's both.
Okay.
And I do think, and the tone today I thought had been very good, but in terms of we understand what everybody is trying to do. In other words, you understand the importance of the educational and healthcare institutions, which is important, and we understand the importance of the city. We're certainly surrounded by the neighborhoods of the city, and the health of our institutions is directly related to the health of the neighborhoods that surround us. So I think that actually everybody is trying their best to say what they do best, but I think that everybody is interested in working together to figure out how do we continue going forward in a way, not that there was a problem, but that 8 years has passed since the work had started. So talking together about finding the best way to continue, we're continuing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Ted Kennedy said, "And the dream shall never die." Do you know what I mean? We're still going forward.
Yeah.
We're still trying to figure out what's the best way to work together to fulfill the mission of our organizations as we also help build and enhance the city. And I don't think that there's anyone that has spoken here today that isn't willing to sit down in a room together and figure that out.
My final question would be, I brought up the federal tax. You added on to that about, some of the negative things in there, and there were certainly worse things in there. For example, getting rid of the taxing scholarships for graduate students, right? Getting rid of or heavily reducing the student loan repayment tax credits. So those things were not in there. Ultimately, we got to this point, whether it's targeting colleges in blue states or not. I know University of Texas, if this implements with inflation, will also be included. So politics aside, I'm happy that there is a tax on the endowment at 1.4%. I'll just put that out there. And so, and I assume both of your organizations are in opposition to that.
That's right. We are, yes.
Are your organizations doing anything, filing legislation, going to oppose this at the federal level?
Well, it's already law, and we've had several meetings with our delegation from Massachusetts, and they agree with our position that it is wrong. The tax will eventually, I think it's 65 or 66% of the institutions that are impacted are in blue states. I don't think it applies to public. I think it's just private. I don't think it'll apply to public institutions. And at the end of the day, what it means is that there's money that we are. A mecca for medical research, biotech. That's money that's not going to be engaged in that process. It's going to go out of the state.
Right. But a lot of this tax and this general accounting for these institutions had happened since, I think, 2004 there was an audit, or 2010, looking at especially Harvard and the fact that its endowment was so large, and yet it was still charging kids whose parents made $40,000 or less tuition. There were concessions made because this is based off of investment income that the university has. This is not in pursuit of its mission or anything. This is just based off its endowment and these hedge funds that they're using to manage even other people's money. So I want to be clear. It wasn't. There's other issues, I guess, with this money and how it's been managed and how much money Harvard has been able to make off of its endowment. And so I think in many cases, the 1.4% tax at the federal level, what I find is unfortunate is going to the federal government. That's not coming here locally. And I'd ask the city if they would consider some leadership or some sort of parity in considering it, since the federal government's moving on it. But I just wanted to put it out there. This is not as though we're taxing and taking away scholarship money, or this has been an analyzed, looked at issue with the fact that the nonprofit institution could have billions of dollars in investments.
But though, I think the income, I think the taxes on the income that's generated by the investments. But I think all that money goes back into the university. It goes back into the nonprofit charitable mission of the university. It goes back into the research that they do. It goes back into student services. It goes back into construction projects, which generate jobs for construction workers. That money is it's for the university now, and it's for the university 20 years from now, 50 years from now. It's not a profit that they're using. It's money that's invested back in the university. I think it's a good thing that we have schools that have those endowments, because that's money that's here. It's being spent here. It's being spent to hire people here, to do research here, to spend here. And it's driving research. And at the end of the day, the cure for cancer, the cure for Alzheimer's, it's coming out of the research that's going on in these institutions, whether it's Dana-Farber, MIT, Harvard, BU. It's that research. We're going to get a cure for these diseases, and the savings that's going to accrue to the city and state governments from those medical advancements is going to be huge. But that's where the money's going back into.
Right, but again, I mean, you understand that the university responded by having to give free tuition to students at $40,000, then $60,000, then $100,000 because it wasn't going into helping students in many cases. The university had to adjust what it was doing because it was under a critical eye. And then in terms of all of those things you said, I completely agree with. You know, a lot of the research that's been done that also supports big pharma, that supports all of these other institutions as well, happens at these universities as well. It's the pursuit of knowledge, good and bad, that they endeavor to do. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not beating up or attacking universities or the concept of them. I just want to be clear that I just do not agree with your statement or your organization's stance that they are paying their fair share. That's all.
Duly noted.
Thank you. Councilor Janey.
Thank you. Could you state your name again, sir?
Sure, it's Robert McCarran,
And you're from what organization?
the Association of Independent Colleges, Universities in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Now, I just want to come back quickly to the jobs piece. I know we've been talking about jobs since the very first panel. Now, you mentioned how many jobs? Was it
Over 10,000.
10,000 jobs? Out of how many? That's for Boston residents, right?
Yes, Boston.
So out of how many jobs?
For our association for across the state?
I'm particularly interested for Boston. How many jobs in Boston, and how many of those jobs are going to Boston residents, people of color, women?
I don't know the numbers for that, but I could get those.
Could you?
Yeah.
That would be helpful. I think you were the one who mentioned a figure of spending for goods and services. Was it 1.7 billion?
Yes.
1.7 billion. How much of that 1.7 billion is going to MBEs or WBEs?
I'm sorry, to?
Minority business enterprises or women business enterprises?
I don't have the answer for that. This was really, we said we would like to try to get some basic data for this, for purposes of this hearing, and it was short notice, so we tried to get just basic data.
I would be very interested in that, if you could provide that as a follow-up as well.
I will try to do that.
That would be excellent, thank you. You also mentioned other community benefits, the Crimson Summer Academy as an example.
Yes.
Do you have a breakdown of how many students from Boston are able to attend that?
I believe, as I mentioned, I think each of the institutions, or a lot of them, are filing written testimony, and I think the specific data for a lot of these would be included in that.
Okay, I'll try to take a look at that. So I'm particularly interested in, of the benefits that you mentioned, how many Boston residents, Boston students, students of color are able to benefit from these programs. So like Councilor Edwards said, I think when there's 25% still left on the table, that more could be done. And so while 75% is coming in, we have to remember that this is only 25% of the assessed value, half of which is coming in cash payment. So in my opinion, I agree with her that much more could be done on all fronts. I certainly appreciate that the medical community has done much more to meet their obligations and their commitment in terms of this voluntary program. I wonder if, so a lot has been said around community engagement. Would you be open, or any of you, be open to having the city as well as community residents participate in determining, so this is not about a master plan process that's every 10 years. This is about, we've got some community benefits that we might be deciding in the next 6 months, as any one of these institutions could do, having others sit at the table and have input into that process?
I think that's important, and that would be a very worthwhile effort. As I said, the Boston Health Commission now has a survey. I'm not sure how that's done or with whom it's done, but getting good information about where the need is and how to serve that need within the mission of the institutions is very worthwhile.
I appreciate that. I think that's it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for your testimony. That concludes the panel and questions and answers from my colleagues. I will now move to public testimony. I'm going to take a 2-second, well, a little more, recess, sorry.
Would like to thank all of the panelists, certainly everyone who has attended this hearing, everyone who is watching. I was very much interested in hearing testimony from the public and wish I could stay. I did not realize that this hearing would go on so long, but that is just, I think, an indication of the interest and how important this issue is. And so while the hour is late, I do have another commitment in my district and cannot stay. I am very much interested in hearing what members of the public have to say and look forward to reviewing the tape so I can see the rest of the hearing. So thank you all for being here. And thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. So I'm going to call names in the order of which you signed in. Some people didn't circle whether they wanted to testify or not, so I'll call your name. If you don't want to testify, it's your preference. You can line up at either podium, and I'd ask that you stay to a 2.5-minute statement. We have several sheets. I will give the 30-second to wrap it up. Thank you. Caitlin Gaffney, Ruby Reyes was here. Rev Walker, Mark Liu, Patrick Dubai, Lisa Owens. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Caitlin Gaffney, and I am about to begin my 19th year as an educator and BTU building rep at the Maurice J. Tobin K-8 School in Mission Hill, Roxbury. I am also a proud alumna of Northeastern University and have been an adjunct in the College of Professional Studies, working with graduate students for about 15 years, and now an SEIU member as well. In that time, I have been witness to a multitude of changes. Northeastern's footprint in Roxbury has significantly enlarged. The Tobin School lost our library and librarian. Northeastern student housing expanded. The Tobin School lost our student support coordinator. Northeastern built state-of-the-art buildings. Tobin School lost our shared social worker and could never afford a guidance counselor. Northeastern expanded their global reach. Tobin School lost our school resource officer. Northeastern continues to be at the cutting edge of research and development. The Tobin School lost our assistant principal position. Northeastern's reputation, along with its tuition, has soared. Tobin School student programs, content coaches, and resources dwindled. The juxtaposition of serving the students of Boston in decrepit conditions, lacking the proper resources and manpower to do the ever increasingly difficult work during the day while teaching graduate students in ultra-modern facilities by night has caused me to have a crisis of conscience. Sometimes when I drive home late after class, looking up at the sparkling skyscrapers on campus, I think about what could be for the Tobin community if a fraction of the $17 million in non-payment came back into the community from the university. Would our families be able to afford an apartment in their neighborhood? Would our students have a gym, music, dance, or theater? Would they have rodent-free classrooms with clean air vents and water they can actually drink? While I feel great pride in the powerhouse that Northeastern has become, grateful for my own first-rate education and the things they already do for the community, I feel acute sadness in what our Boston Public School students continue to lose when it comes to equity of resources, facilities, and funding. Today, I call upon the Boston City Council to hold Northeastern and all of the other institutions responsible for giving back their fair share to this great city that they have significantly benefited from. Will the universities be as patient with their students who went for years with past due tuition bills as the city has been with these substantial overdue payments? The citizens, and particularly the students, deserve greater transparency and a clear system of accountability. And I am asking that we speak up for our children and fight for what is deservedly theirs, now long past due. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, please, you're just taking time away from other folks, please.
Greetings. My name is Reverend Vernon K. Walker, and I'm a resident of the city of Boston, graduate of the Boston University School of Theology. And I want to thank you, counselors, for convening this meeting and engaging in public discourse about the pilot program. I'm here today because I'm gravely concerned about the 49 institutions that about the institutions that occupy, nonprofit institutions that occupy about 49% of the land in Boston. I'm here today because there are about 2.9 million residents in Massachusetts who are suffering. And I'm here representing two organizations, the Massachusetts Poor People's Campaign, where I'm one of the faith leaders. And for the last several months, we've been engaging in public and civil disobedience around the issues that affect the poor, the marginalized, the disenfranchised. And I'm also here representing MCAN, Massachusetts Communities Action Network, which is an organization that is dedicated to social and political change and from a religious perspective. I'm here today, brothers and sisters, because poverty is very real. And because these institutions have not done what they've said on paper, people are suffering. Because people are suffering, that's why I'm here, because I'm morally outraged that people are suffering from the crippling and damaging effects of poverty. Currently, as it stands, the average net worth of a black person in Boston is $8, according to the Boston Globe series that was released last year, the Spotlight series, where the average net worth of a Caucasian family is $247,000. So when we talk about economical inequality and trying to bridge the gap, perhaps one of the ways that we can bridge the gap is to hold these institutions accountable to what they said on paper. That's why I'm here today. I'm here today to stand in solidarity to say that it is time for a change. And as a result of these institutions not paying, it is $60 million that could be used for social good, for infrastructure improvement, for potholes to be fixed across the city, for job creations, and also for crosswalk signs to be placed in every neighborhood in Boston. That's why I'm here today, because social good could be used for the money that has not, unfortunately, been collected as of today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mark Liu. I'm from the Chinese Progressive Association. We represent over 1,200 members, primarily based in Boston Chinatown and also other Boston neighborhoods. We work to empower the Chinese American community to work for full equal rights and to improve the living work conditions for folks in our community. In Chinatown, we've had the direct experience of living in the shadow of large institutions. For decades, we've dealt with the expansion of Tufts Medical Center and Tufts University in the heart of our neighborhood. After years of organizing for better neighborhood services, Tufts has become a better institutional partner, and I don't want to take away from the things they've done to help the community, but the fact remains that they have taken a third of the land in the middle of Chinatown. And in a compact neighborhood, and I don't think we're the only neighborhood that faces this in Boston, with limited space, every inch of land is essential to develop affordable housing and essential services for our communities. The woman who spoke before me spoke passionately about education. There is, you know, as a lot of people know, there's a 60-year wait for a permanent library in Chinatown. So there's a lot of needs that the land could be used for. And these have been clearly documented, and there are still competing demands in our neighborhood for the land with large nonprofit institutions, for parking, for the institutions, as well as housing. Student professionals who work at Tufts, Suffolk University, and Emerson College, and other nearby institutions have squeezed out residents and housing that used to serve working families, and we can go, you know, through some concrete examples on Essex Street, Harrison Ave, or they've also provided the clientele for the new luxury units in our neighborhood. As has been presented today, there's almost $78 million of uncollected pilot funds since 2012. Furthermore, the number of institutions paying the full pilot contribution has dropped from 48% to 26% in the past 6 or 7 years. And this is unacceptable. It is unacceptable when we have a housing crisis, which is displacing people daily, and the demand for affordable housing is through the roof. When a Chinatown affordable housing complex recently opened its waiting list for 1 and 4 bedroom units, 2,527 people applied for them. One of our members, a displaced Boston resident who's number 451 on the wait list, said to us he'll die before he'll get affordable housing. We need large institutions who have the ability to give to support the residents they are directly or indirectly displacing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call a few more names. Keely Mullen, Matt Birchfield, Alex Ahmed, Margaret Whittier Ferguson. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Pratik Dubey, and I am a student at Northeastern University and a member of the Northeastern Housing Justice Coalition. Having been a student at Northeastern for the past 3 years, it has been very easy to see the ways in which Northeastern has been expanding into its surrounding communities, both in terms of its physical presence and its influence. Each year, Northeastern accepts more students than it has the capacity to house, thus forcing more and more students off campus and into the surrounding neighborhoods as gentrifiers. At the same time, Northeastern continues its efforts to reshape Lower Roxbury through developments like the Interdisciplinary Science and Engineering Complex and the Burke Street Dorms, both projects that were carried out with little to no community engagement. Northeastern reaps all the benefits of occupying the communities that it does, but gives nothing in return except for displacement and gentrification. Since 2012, Northeastern has paid just $5.5 million, or 29%, of the $18.7 million the city has requested from them as part of the pilot program. This is not due to its inability to pay, but rather its unwillingness. While Northeastern fails to pay its fair share to the city, it spends vast amounts on projects like the $225 million science complex I just mentioned, and $26 million on an athletics complex, both in Lower Roxbury. It is obvious that Northeastern prioritizes its own growth over the well-being of the community. As an institution with a nearly $800 million endowment, Northeastern cannot continue to freeload off the city, especially when our public schools are underfunded and in need of repairs, and many of the students lack the resources that make one day attending an institution like Northeastern a legitimate possibility. Considering how much Northeastern takes from the city, it has an obligation to be a good community member. And to quote our own President Aoun, we need to be more in tune with the needs expressed to us than we have been. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Keely. Am I next? Awesome. My name's Keely. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative. Thanks for having this hearing. So I wanted to first just start out by describing part of why I think it's a total farce, actually, that these universities are really considered nonprofits even. Harvard made, just in 2017, Harvard made $3 billion just on returns on its investment for its endowment. Just money that was sitting there in its endowment, they made $3 billion off of that. Northeastern paid its president $3.1 million in 2013 for his salary, not to mention the magnificent mansion that he lives in, paid for by the university on Beacon Hill. The board of trustees at Northeastern has representatives of Goldman Sachs, GE, National Grid, and ExxonMobil. BU's endowment is $2 billion. I mean, this is just a handful of statistics, but these don't sound like nonprofit institutions to me at all. I graduated from Northeastern it was a year and a half ago now, and I graduated with $150,000 in student debt. And that's just the beginning. That's just the beginning of the crises, all these crises that young people are staring down the barrel of. There's the just existential crisis of student debt that will never crawl out from under. There's the total lack of affordable housing, pervasive low wages, lack of employment opportunities, and just generally a really unstable future. And somehow not a single one of these institutions that's supposed to be providing this public good has made their full payment. It really makes absolutely no sense to me. Last year, Harvard paid $3.2 million in their pilot payment, and in 2015, they were able to pay $58 million just to 7 investors to manage their endowment. It sounds like the absolute priority of these institutions isn't giving back to the city, but is getting a return on their investment, which is actually money that's being given by people from Sally Mae, in my case. Meanwhile, in Boston, you'd have to work 80 hours a week, every single week, at minimum wage in order to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. And so we hear that affordable housing is being built, but the barometer for what's affordable is for people that make household incomes of $68,000 a year. Meanwhile, more than half of Boston residents make less than $35,000 a year. So even what's considered affordable by the city is actually unaffordable for the majority of people in Boston. There's a tidal wave of people now that are fighting against inequality. There's movements being built in cities all over the U.S., and we have an opportunity to actually demonstrate what it would take to build a movement to fight back and to hold these universities accountable. I'm really excited about that. And just the very last thing I wanted to say is I really didn't appreciate what the gentleman from the Association of Independent Universities, whatever, said about student spending being somehow a community benefit that these universities provide. As someone who was living off of debt in college, I was not spending anything other than what I was spending on my rent and on basic necessities. And so I think it's really important that we don't allow representatives like that to divide students and the community and students and working people who are ultimately going to fight together for a stronger pilot. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, my name is Matt. I'm a graduate student at Northeastern. I'm just here to briefly mention that Northeastern and really most universities in Boston offer very limited graduate housing. I mention that because several people so far have mentioned displacement and more broadly the affordable housing crisis that we've got going on in this city. And clearly part of the cause of these skyrocketing rents, I mean, rent for a 1-bedroom apartment has risen about 5% over the last year. Part of the cause of this deals with students moving to the city, and a lot or maybe even most of these students, like me, don't live in housing provided by their university. Anyways, it seems natural to me, given this connection, that universities should have a role in solving the affordable housing crisis. I think that these uncollected pilot payments, which, by the way, I think should be mandatory to begin with, it's only 25% of what they would be paying if they weren't nonprofits. I think that some of this money is desperately needed to build affordable housing, not just for students, but for Boston residents in general.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Alex Ahmed, and I'm also a Northeastern graduate student. I'm working towards my PhD in computer science. I was compelled to come today because Northeastern alone is responsible for 45% of the pilot program's shortfall. About 1,400 of my fellow graduate students and I are employed by the university to teach and to do research. We further the university's mission, and without our labor, it would not function. For the past couple years, we have been working to form a union. I am proud to be here as a member of our union's organizing committee, and I appreciate the chance to share with you my experiences as a Northeastern employee. As a union, we seek improvements to pay, healthcare, childcare, and the toxic, abusive working conditions we work under. Our newly unionized colleagues at Harvard are fighting for the same. However, the Northeastern University administration has opposed our union at every step of the way. Through campus-wide emails, they have reproduced the same old anti-union rhetoric that companies have employed for decades. They have created doubt and fear by suggesting that international students might have their visas put in jeopardy if they supported the union. They have employed an anti-union law firm to assist them in fighting us, just as they fought our dining hall workers and our adjunct faculty. What does this have to do with Pilot? Northeastern's anti-union behavior marks them as a corporation like any other, despite their nonprofit label. They have focused their resources towards expansive growth, gobbling up real estate in surrounding neighborhoods, and pay their administrators six-figure and in some cases seven-figure salaries. Meanwhile, its workers, us, fight for scraps. Many of us are kept in precarious, temporary positions with few protections. Many of the universities that have fought pilot payments have also fought unionization campaigns on their campuses. These institutions must be held accountable to the people. We, the workers, pay our fair share of taxes. Why is our employer not doing the same? Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Margaret. I graduated from Northeastern this past May, and it was made clear again and again during my time there the lengths to which Northeastern will go to suppress the voices and needs of students, staff, professors, and community members to maintain their business plans. We cannot rely on the good faith effort, especially in the midst of a housing crisis that is devastating to both community members and students alike. This was made clear to me when the university admin consistently denied students and workers basic needs and desires after the majority of students voted yes on a referendum question proposing a $15 an hour living wage for all campus workers, as well as voting in favor of the university cutting ties with the fossil fuel industry. It was made clear when Northeastern spent millions of dollars on hiring, as we just heard, a union-busting law firm to fight the formation of a grad student union. While universities, of course, contribute financially and culturally to the city of Boston, they are a leading cause of gentrification in our city, and their determination of what community benefit should be is clearly flawed. Northeastern has a $2.7 million research contract with ICE, and we are going to trust that they can determine what will benefit the surrounding communities when these communities are disproportionately affected by that same organization's threat to immigrants. While some of the community programs are beneficial, many of them seem questionable forms of pilot payment. For example, BU uses Jumpstart as a benefit to write off, but Jumpstart is an externally funded program, so BU doesn't put money into the program that allows them to pay less on their pilot. Tufts uses contributions to Boston-based nonprofits to get community program exemptions, but looking at the records, many of these donations are actually appearing as payments to get advertising in the nonprofit's literature. There shouldn't be an exemption for community programs, that even the best of which should be provided anyway without getting out of paying taxes. How can we rely on the benevolence of the Northeastern administration when its board is dominated by members tied to ExxonMobil, to Goldman Sachs, GE, and National Grid? Northeastern pays 6% of their pilot payment if you're including the community benefits it provides. We need a mandated 50% payment. We need a stronger pilot that can fund high-quality, affordable housing. And asking politely or trying to shame the universities into making this happen isn't going to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Freeman, Elon Axelbank, Alexis Gonzalez, Sharon Jones, Brenda Cheney, Alba Gonzalez.
Hi. Am I up? Yeah. Sarah Freeman, Jamaica Plain. I'm very impressed with this whole hearing, the panelists, the counselors' questions, the public comments have been very thought-provoking and interesting. I'd like to address a missing piece, though. the environmental community hasn't really been a part of these discussions. We've been talking among ourselves about this very topic, but not part of a larger group. So as a follow-up to some of the previous comments, if there is a commission set up to look at this whole issue, I would like to know how the environmental group gets a seat at the table. And in particular, in the second panel, the last commenter, participant talked about the possibility of directing contributions. And many of us, I'll give one example. Many of you probably remember in the late 90s when the Muddy River flooded and caused extensive damage, many millions. The Kenmore T was closed for a month. The MFA and Northeastern were impacted. And it's possible that if they could direct funds to these purposes that would help them as well, that it would expand the pie. And just to clarify, there are so many worthy causes in the city. This is not to squeeze anyone else out, but to really generate funds that are not currently coming in. So thank you, and good luck.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Elon, yeah.
My name is Elon Axelbank. I graduated from Northeastern, and I'm a member of Socialist Alternative. I think we need to be honest. We have a situation right now where there's an absolute affordable housing crisis in this city and cities around the country. We have the 4th highest median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the country, which has gone up just 5% since last year. 6th highest median rent in the country for a 2-bedroom apartment, gone up 4% since last year. Rent's going up, and it's getting harder and harder for regular people to buy a home in this city. We also have a situation where literally over half of all land in Boston is property tax exempt. But who is that half, right? Who doesn't pay property taxes? People who own a home obviously pay property taxes. Everybody in here pays property taxes. But also, I don't even own a home, obviously, because I can't afford to do that. I rent. But that means my landlord is paying property taxes off of my buildings, but you better believe that my landlord isn't paying out of pocket. She's not paying property taxes out of pocket, so she's incorporating that into my rent. So really, renters pay property taxes as well. Who doesn't pay property taxes? It's the giant corporate institutions like Harvard, like Northeastern, like BU, and yeah, technically they're nonprofits, but these are some of the most corporate institutions in our city. Harvard is the 2nd richest nonprofit in the world, second only to the Catholic Church. They have a $37 billion endowment, and they paid $3 million to the city in 2017 for their pilot payment. I think this was about 9% of what their property taxes would be. So they paid $3 million to the city for their pilot payment. What did they pay their top official for the Harvard management company that oversees their endowment? They paid him $15 million. So they paid one guy who oversees their endowment 5 times what they paid to the entire city of Boston. It's absolutely outrageous, and the city council needs to stand up to them, and we need to build a movement that can stand up to them. We've tried for years to ask for voluntary payments. But since when has it ever worked to ask for voluntary payments from corporate institutions? Unfortunately, the answer is never. And so, in my opinion, we need to make pilot mandatory. We can't keep asking politely for these things. And I hear people saying, oh, well, it's not in the legal framework. I understand that, but there's things that we can do. In Rhode Island, they said that we're not going to provide you with city services until you make your pilot payments. The city could say, we're not going to allow your zoning appeals to go through for higher buildings and higher buildings until you make your pilot payments. These are things that the city council could do, and with the building of a strong movement of the widest layers of regular people in the city, we can do. Just to end, I think it's crucial that we talk about where this money goes, because as we're building this movement, and that's ultimately what it's going to take, it can't just come from the city council asking. We need a movement. As we're building this movement, we need to talk about where this money is going to go. We should tax the big universities to fund the construction of new high-quality, public, and permanently affordable housing, and we should also talk about repealing the statewide ban on rent control, because we can't just afford to build new affordable housing. We need that. We also need to protect the current homes that we have from greedy landlords and corporate developers. So we need to stand up to the big universities, tax the big universities, and fund affordable housing.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Ashley. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I am also a member of Socialist Alternative, and I'm a resident of Dorchester. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which has been a national leader on same-sex marriage, healthcare, and other progressive issues, it's outrageous that we forgive property taxes for the wealthiest universities in the world while failing to ensure adequate shelter for both students and full-time residents in our community. Throughout this hearing, the voluntary nature of the pilot program under law has been emphasized again and again, but this is exactly the problem. Wealthy universities charge exorbitant tuition out of reach for the average resident of Boston, and then claim this as a benefit to the same communities who are suffering under gentrification. Having failed to provide affordable on-campus housing, the universities force students to pack into our neighborhoods, enduring uncomfortable, unsafe, and at times even fatal conditions. In 2013, as a result of overcrowding in her off-campus apartment, a Boston University student perished in a house fire. I do not view this as a community benefit. The other half of this crisis falls to those of us who make the city of Boston our home year-round. Due to the statewide ban on rent control, every year corporate landlords are empowered to raise rents as high as they like, knowing that every autumn a fresh batch of students will arrive in town with a blank check. I do not view this as a community benefit either. Surely Harvard, with its $37 billion endowment, can afford to continue its scholarships and speakers program without burdening Boston residents with the weight of the university's unpaid property taxes. Our progressive leaders on the City Council should use their platform to boldly advocate for the housing needs of their constituents, a mandatory pilot program, publicly owned affordable housing, and rent control. The resources exist to build affordable housing in our city. The will exists to build a statewide movement for affordable housing and stabilized rents, beginning here in Boston, and laws can be changed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and good evening. My name is Sharon Jones. I wanted to bring a face to homelessness. I'm a mother of 3. 2 of my children are college graduates. I work for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I've been in human service for over 30 years. I'm homeless now. I'm listening and receiving flyers, etc. And even the homeless people that was in this room today have a place to go tonight. I go to my car. I put my teenage honor student at somebody else's house, so she's separated from her mother now, so that she can be stable. I don't know what that's going to look like next year or this winter when it gets cold, because I can't afford rent, and I lived in subsidy. But because I'm the working poor, I don't qualify for anything, and I can't afford rent. So again, I just wanted to bring a face to that, so that when we're talking about the community and the culture of the community, this is what it looks like now. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody else? Paula Ortiz, Clarissa Rodriguez, Robella Polonis, Rich Giordano, and Maria Marura.
I'm not any of those amazing mothers, but I did just want to come up here quickly and just give this to you guys. We had a wonderful group of moms from St. Stephen's program in the South End who are going to testify in English and Spanish. In here, there are some testimonies in English and Spanish, but as well as some really interesting, sometimes funny pictures from their kids about what they would like to be in the future, including spies, which is interesting. But they really hope to be here throughout, but it ran a little long for them. But you could see how much they ask for the participation of our richest institutions for what they are seeing in the underfunding of their schools. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Siomo, how are you? Councilor George, Councilor Edwards, thank you very much for holding this hearing. For the record, my name is Richard Giordano. I work at Fenway Community Development Corporation. We are proud part of the Pilot Action Group. What I'd like to testify to today is a very specific nuts and bolts part of the larger things that people have addressed to you just in the last few minutes. The community benefits part of the pilot program is too loose and too unaccountable and lacks any kind of guidelines. So you can do all sorts of things to offset your voluntary tax payment. I'd like to make a concrete suggestion about one way to establish a very quantifiable and very effective and necessary part of what either could be community benefit or of actually the pilot system. As you heard from the earlier testimony, the universities have done tremendous good things for this city, but they've also created tremendous problems. I just took a fast look at the University Accountability Report that the city did for the last year. There's approximately 65,000 graduate and undergraduate students living in Boston, off campus, in our housing. There's approximately 4,700 students in Alston, 3,700 in Brighton, 3,800 in Mission Hill, and 5,200 in the Fenway-Kenmore area. Using the city's statistics, we are led to believe that those 65,000 students are taking over approximately 10,000 2- to 3-family buildings in the city of Boston alone. The universities have changed their model. They have a business model, and they've changed it, so let's not fool ourselves. They're businesses. They no longer do regional and local education. They pull from all over the globe. Those students who come here get a good education, no question about it, but they need to stay somewhere, and they stay in our housing in our city. And the university's business models have not accounted for that. And the students are pawns in this whole process, along with having to pay the debt that they do. So I'm suggesting that one of the things that the pilot system should look at, if the universities are not going to actually start building dorms to the level that they need to, is that they start donating the land that they have, that they've been land banking, and in some cases pretty much exploiting and or holding for other purposes. Donate it to nonprofits and community development corporations that will build affordable housing. Interestingly enough, those properties will then come back on the tax roll because affordable housing pays taxes as opposed to what the universities do. So I'd just like to have that as a consideration for the pilot system. Thank you.
Lisa Owens, Andrew Escato, Mary Murnahan? Come on down. Gates Godfrey, Kathy Glenn. I think that's it.
Howdy. My name is Marcy Murningham, and I actually printed out and brought copies of my prepared remarks. I don't think there's enough time, and you've been sitting here all day for me to go through them all, but let me just summarize what I have to say. I am the founder and director of an entity that's really a doing business as. It's really a label for me that allows me to do independent contracting called the Lighthouse Investment Group. And I live in Watertown, but I have deep roots in Boston going back to the mid to late 1970s. And for the past 35 years, my work has resided at the crossroads of money, power, and the public interest. I want to zoom out and then zoom in and place within the context of what you are discussing today within the larger context of wealth, power, and the public interest. And there are several reasons for that. Let me just run through them briefly. One is that 50 years ago, my father was the mayor of the capital of Michigan at a time, 1968, when the nation was swept up in all kinds of cultural changes, particularly political battles affecting race and the war and changing cultural norms. I came here in 1971 and came to Boston, or to Cambridge actually, in 1975. Found myself as a graduate student, as a doctoral student at Harvard, retained by a professor at Harvard Law School named Oliver Oldman, who was a tax professor who was conducting a study of tax-exempt property in Boston. That is when I first learned that 60% of the dirt, of the real estate in Boston, was off the tax rolls. And the work that Professor Oldman did in conjunction with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy served as a building block for the early days of what we now call pilot. Meanwhile, knowing that property tax revenues are not enough to generate the revenues that are needed to do business, and that you all are constrained by the trifecta of rising pension costs, fixed costs on debt servicing loans, and then limited revenues, what you are facing is trying to pay for services within a limited frame that fails to address billions of dollars in financial capital that surrounds you every day. Over the years, and I worked on the Boston school desegregation case, so I know very well about what is called for in terms of institutional reform, new arrangements, new structures that will allow for the public interest to be served. And one of the things that I learned when I started getting into the money and morality business in 1983, and when I testified before the Boston City Council at the request of Charles Yancey in 1984 on a proposal he had for South Africa-related divesting, that there are vast pools of financial capital, not that could be given away, but that could be invested, and that the tax-exempt institutions that are on your list are a fraction of the pool of available capital that is out there that could be invested in ways that advance the very same public interest opportunities and priorities that you're addressing today. So my hope is that as you work through this very important work, and I applaud the efforts of the City Council, I applaud the efforts of the Pilot Action Group, and I applaud all of the efforts that are represented here by many good people who bring different definitions and solution sets to the table, that you also look not just at what might be given away, but how literally billions, tens of billions of dollars in financial assets might be invested in ways that advance affordable housing, decent work, criminal justice reform, clean energy, and all the other priorities that exist. There is a vast, I know that you want to cut me off, but there's a vast apparatus that you could be.
Extra, Marcy,
okay.
So we have your
you
written
have
testimony,
a statement,
and I will distribute it to my colleagues.
Vast infrastructure available to help you do that.
Thank you. I have read every name. Is there anyone? Okay. Oh, sure. Come on up.
Hi, my name is Gates. I live in Jamaica Plain, and I'm a member of Socialist Alternative. I'm a worker making just above minimum wage, and I live paycheck to paycheck. At any given time, I could get sick, miss work, and not be able to pay my rent. And I've been right up to that edge where I can't afford my rent and might end up on the street. And I'm sure that a majority of the 50% of Boston residents that make less than $35K a year have also been there, and especially the 21%, that's more than 1 in 5, that make less than $10K a year. 40,000 families in this city are on the affordable housing wait list, but even affordable housing in this city is factored on an income of $68,000 a year. Every year, these huge nonprofit colleges enroll thousands more students than they can house, causing much of the housing supply in the city, much of it run down, rat-infested, and above market rate, to be rented to desperate students without landlords having to make any kind of improvement to the property. These people who inhabited these apartments before are pushed out by rent raises, gentrification caused by these colleges' institutional creep. These colleges and other untaxable institutions own 49% of the land in Boston, yet they can't find the space to house their students. Should they not be accountable for the gentrification and gouging out of the housing supply that they cause? Are they somehow let off the hook because they sometimes pay their pilots and provide these unregulated, disconnected community benefits? Why are we not asking the communities what would benefit them? These large institutions are destroying communities with their growth, displacing the people who live here. How is an entity actively inhibiting the health of these neighborhoods supposed to know what the community needs? It's like asking a candy salesman for dental advice. Pilot payments should be used to fund the building of high-quality, affordable housing in the city, and these institutions should be held accountable for the impact that they have on these communities and the displacement that they have caused. These institutions take advantage of all the same benefits of living in Boston that we do, so why do they not pay their fair share? We need to not just more strictly enforce, but also strengthen the pilot program.
Thank you. Oh, sure.
Hi, I was on the list, but there's a list sheet that you didn't get, I guess. Anyway, thank you for hanging in there with us. My name is Jerry Scarpatulo.
I'm Robert Folan Johnson with Active Boston and Boston Homeless Solidarity Committee.
Yeah. I'm also a member of Active Boston, and I'm a retired member of District 65 United Auto Workers, and a current member of Pride at Work, AFL-CIO, the Gay Caucus of Organized Labor. And we're here, actually, Rob was here 27 years ago with ACT UP, trying to get money for homeless people living with HIV. There are currently 300 to 500 people living with HIV in the city of Boston who are living with HIV. I was here at a city council hearing. I think Councilor Asabi George might have been here also, perhaps, a year and a half ago, when we had 15 homeless people from Boston shelters here, many of whom were HIV positive after the crisis of the Longfellow Bridge, not the Longfellow Bridge, but the Long Island Bridge that fell down. Some of them, they're still there. They're still there at 112 Southampton and homeless. And what has happened since then? The city, we were trying to get the city to save 2 programs at the shelter for people in recovery and for people living with HIV, the latter of which is called Safe Harbor. Those programs are gone. I asked myself, why did I wait 4 hours to speak here? You're the only 3 councilors that are left. So you're the only ones that are going to hear us. There's no press here. They're still living over there.
My ex, who's got full-blown AIDS, is living in a storage facility on Mass Ave. He's not alone. There are a number of people living in that same storage facility.
I spoke to Sharon, the speaker earlier, that was homeless.
Yeah.
I hope
I was one of the speakers, but she left. But the HIV epidemic has not gone away. In the past 3 years, close to 2,000 people in Massachusetts have been infected, and over 200 people are still dying every year in the state. The incidence, the annual amount of new infections has plateaued. It was up here, now it's down here, but now it's plateaued to about 600 or 700 a year. And I'm a volunteer housing case manager at a big HIV nonprofit. I only volunteer 8 hours a week. I have 50 clients. I get 2 new ones a week.
All homeless.
All homeless.
With HIV.
So it's, I guess it's a plea at this point. It's a plea with you to see, because this money is tax revenue money. It could go to the Boston Public Health Commission. It could go to fund 400 housing vouchers for the homeless that the Homeless Solidarity Committee has been fighting for 4 years. So you're going to save lives directly if you can help us.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Clara Lucian. I am a teacher, and this year I decided to do the teacher leadership program, and my research project focused on how can pilot programs better serve Boston Public Schools. Overall, Boston Public Schools are continuously underfunded and lacking in resources. So in thinking about how pilot programs can better serve Boston Public Schools, I did some research and I had 3 recommendations. The first recommendation is the fact that it's voluntary, as was echoed by everyone. Although it's voluntary, it should be a requirement that 80% of the contributions continuously be made. A second recommendation that I have is having a clear definition of community benefits. What is community benefits? There's a lot of ambiguity surrounding it. So one of the things that happens is without a clear definition of community benefits, many of these institutions have a wide range of services that they file under community benefits. In establishing a clear definition of community benefits, members of the Boston community can provide feedback on the ways that they can serve our communities and Boston Public Schools. The last recommendation that I have is that Boston Public Schools could create a database of school needs. Tax-exempt institutions can use these databases to service various Boston Public Schools. In creating this database, Boston Public Schools will establish strengths and weaknesses within their learning community. Through establishing the resources needed, schools can produce a greater outcome in students' academic, social, and emotional growth. Tax-exempt institutions could look through the database and choose the schools that would better suit their resources. These contributions can be made in the form of establishing scholarships, creating a library, career training, sports programming. These databases would create the transparency that is lacking with the pilot program. It would allow lawmakers, taxpayers, and various community members to see how the pilot program uses their resources to benefit our community and our schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may just
You're back.
No, I'm so sorry. Yeah, another one of those things. This comes from, I just wanted to highlight this one because some students were going to read it on behalf of the parent councils from the Quincy Lower School, from the Winship School, from the Bates School, and from the Mission Hill School. This story is interesting because they tried on their own to reach out to Boston College to talk about, hey, Boston College, can you contribute through your community benefits to this vital program that we are losing unintentionally through Boston Public Schools Opportunity Index changes this year? And what they got, unfortunately, was a B rating on the phone and a lack of engagement when these institutions, when they tried to reach out. So we really, and Johnny mentioned this in his testimony, community benefits work best when they're in communication with the community. And we really hope to work with these institutions because our schools need it. So I just wanted to present this. Unfortunately, they didn't make copies, but if I could give it to one of you folks.
We'll make sure it
Thank
gets
you.
distributed.
And that's it. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for hosting this hearing. This is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like I'm going to let the sponsors have the last word. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all who came today and who are still here right now in the chamber. This is the first, I think, of a number of meetings that we'll be together to discuss this. This can't be a one-and-done style of hearing. I think that it's important to recognize the important role that institutions play in the city of Boston, but also the partnership that certainly so many of us in this room today want to have with these institutions, especially as we as a city more and more rely on property tax revenue from residents and homeowners across the city. I will not say anything more about that because we will have a number of more times to talk and to hopefully move and act on this issue, on this challenge, on this concern, on this hopeful recommitment to the pilot program. But I will use this opportunity to plug, because housing came up a number of times today, a hearing that will be chaired by Councilor Edwards next week on Tuesday that I sponsored regarding vacant affordable units across the city. It's Tuesday, August 7th at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Edwards.
I want to again thank everyone who stuck through the entire hearing and is still here. This is again, as my colleague mentioned, this is the beginning of a conversation. And what I do hope we all saw today was that we can discuss, we can come together, and I do believe we can generate real lasting solutions for our community. We're all partners and stakeholders in this. There are no enemies at the table. They're just better standards that we can hold our institutions to. And I look forward to working with them to create those standards, and I know ultimately we will, and we ultimately will not only continue to lead the nation, but really actually have a true success that all of us can benefit from.
Thank you, Counselor. And let me just end by thanking our staffs who do the incredible work to make this a successful and efficient hearing. The staff behind me, the staff from our offices. So with that, this concludes today's hearing on docket 0710.
Oh, we've already put it away.
I put it away. I'm sorry. 0721 is adjourned.